Today, I decided to take care of Amy and Yuri. When my husband, Ethan, came home, he was with his sister, Amy, and her daughter, Yuri. They had a lot of luggage with them. Ethan told me that from now on, we would live with them and support them. I couldn't believe it. How could he put his sister and niece before our daughter and me? I was furious. This was the last straw. What kind of husband prioritizes his sister over his own family? I decided that I had to do something about it. Let me tell you my story. My name is Amelia, and I've been married to Ethan for 5 years. We have a 4-year-old daughter named Luna. She's everything to us. Ethan and Luna are my world. But it seemed like Ethan didn't feel the same. One evening, I was cooking curry with Luna while waiting for Ethan to come home. Luna asked, "Mommy, when is Daddy coming back?" I told her I didn't know. Ethan was usually home by now, but it was already past 7:30 p.m., and there was no sign of him. I couldn't get a hold of him either. Luna said, "Mommy, I'm hungry," so I decided we would eat without him. After dinner, I cleaned up, and finally, Ethan came home. "Welcome back," I said, but then I saw Amy and Yuri standing next to him, carrying a lot of bags. I was shocked. "What's going on?" I asked. Ethan looked at me and said, "From today, we're taking care of Amy and Yuri." I couldn't believe it. Why didn't he tell me anything about this before? Take care of them? Why? What happened? I asked, still confused. He explained that Amy had a fight with her husband, and that's why she called him for help, but I was still upset. "How long are they going to stay?" I asked. "Our apartment is small, and we don't even have a spare room." Ethan wasn't bothered by any of it. He just said, "You can let them use your room." Ethan suggested, "You can move to Luna's room, then we'll have a free room for Amy and Yuri." What? I couldn't believe my ears. My husband expected me to just accept all of this without question. Why do I have to deal with it when we're the ones supporting them? I didn't understand at all. With a big smile, Ethan invited his sister and niece in and told them, "Feel free to make yourselves at home." They didn't even say sorry to intrude and just walked in, settled on the couch, and started watching TV. I pulled Ethan aside and whispered, "Are you out of your mind? Taking care of these two without warning? We don't have much room or money to spare, you know." Ethan sighed and looked annoyed. "Amy's struggling, and you're being so cold. Can't you at least help her out?" I was getting frustrated. It's not that I don't want them to stay for a while, but supporting them like this is too much. They should help with groceries. He looked at me like I was crazy. "You're so stingy. Amy's not working, so of course, she can't contribute." Calling me stingy? I shot back. "I don't care about your opinion. My precious sister is in trouble, and as the head of the house, I've decided to support her. You should just obey me." After that, he went back to playing games with Amy and Yuri. Meanwhile, the curry I had saved for tomorrow was completely eaten by Ethan and them. To make matters worse, I was yelled at by Ethan, "Make more nutritious meals for my niece." Had he ever cared about the nutrition of our daughter Luna's meals? It was clear that he cared more about his niece than his own family. Ethan completely sided with his sister, ignoring my feelings. Even worse, he called me a cheapskate for worrying about our finances. I wasn't asking for much. She couldn't help with food costs because she wasn't working, but that wasn't my problem. No matter how much they were struggling, we couldn't afford to take care of them for free forever. The next day, and the days after that, my husband only focused on spoiling his sister and niece. He barely paid any attention to me or our daughter. "Amy, I got the cake you wanted," Ethan said. "Oh, thanks, Ethan," Amy replied. "I saw some toys from Yuri's favorite cartoon on sale, so I bought them," he said, excited. The cake was just for his sister and niece, and of course, the toys were only for Yuri. Our daughter and his niece are about the same age, so it was obvious that Luna would also love some cake and toys, but I told myself to be patient. Once Amy and her husband made up, they would leave, and everything would go back to normal. I managed to hold back my anger, thinking it was just temporary. Then one day, my daughter asked, "Mom, does Dad like Yuri more than me?" I was shocked. She said, "He's always nice to Yuri, but he doesn't even respond when I try to talk to him." As she said this, Luna's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her tightly. "Don't worry, he's your dad, Luna," I said, trying to comfort her. Though I calmed her down for now, I knew this couldn't continue. A few days later, I talked to Ethan. "You need to change your attitude. Luna feels left out. It's okay that you care about Yuri, but you need to spend time with Luna, too." He sighed. "Alright, it's such a hassle though." A hassle? Our child is Luna, not Yuri, I said. Fine, I'll pay attention to Luna, alright? He replied, but he didn't seem too sincere. Even though I talked to him about Luna's feelings, things didn't change. Luna would look at her dad, happily playing with Yuri, with sad eyes. It wasn't like my sister-in-law, Amy, was going to take care of our daughter. Ethan and Amy were always with Yuri, and I was the only one who paid attention to Luna. She still seemed lonely. A whole month passed living with Amy and Yuri, and my family was falling apart. We could barely make ends meet, no matter how much I cleaned. Our apartment was always messy because Amy and Yuri never helped clean up. Ethan continued to spoil his sister and niece, ignoring me and our daughter. I couldn't take it anymore. I finally confronted him. You've gone too far. I'm sick of this. Can you seriously think about our future? I asked. What's this all of a sudden? Ethan replied. I've been saying this over and over. Life is getting harder. And what are you going to do about Amy and her situation? Are you really going to say we're going to live together forever like this? I asked. What can we do? She's fighting with her husband, Ethan said. Then shouldn't she talk it out with him or get a divorce? It's been a month already. Luna and I are at our limit. Please, think about our feelings too, I said. I knew this topic would upset Ethan, but I had to do it, for Luna and for the future of our family. You know Luna loves you. She sees her dad being so nice to his niece. Of course, she's hurt. Please think about her feelings too, I added. But then Ethan shocked me with his response. Amy is my sister. She's like family to you too. How can you be so cold? Ethan said. Cold? Me? I was shocked by his words. It's not that I don't care about Amy and Yuri. I just need this situation to change. Ethan looked at me as if I was the bad guy. I've always thought you were cold-hearted. Amy's in trouble, and Yuri's lonely without her dad, so of course, I have to give them attention. You take care of Luna, so why can't you handle this too? He said. Wait a second, I replied. I'm taking care of all the household expenses. Why does Luna and I have to suffer like this? My salary is part of our family budget. Well, of course, Amy is my sister, which makes her your family too. Yet you're always saying cold things. Don't you feel embarrassed? Ethan shot back. Ethan shouted at me, blaming me for everything. He looked at me with cold eyes, making it clear that his sister and niece were more important to him than our daughter. Then, he said something that made me doubt my own ears. Amy wants to keep living here, so from now on, we'll be taking care of them. We're responsible for everything, food, clothing, and shelter, he said. In that moment, I felt like all my hope was gone. I was a fool to think he might understand if we talked. Our old life would never come back. I looked Ethan straight in the eyes and said, Fine, then let's get a divorce. He looked at me with a face I'd never seen before. He probably didn't even understand what I had just said. After a long silence, he stared at me in disbelief. Divorce? What the hell are you talking about? Are you kidding? He asked. Do you really think I joke about something like this? I replied. If you're going to ignore my and Luna's feelings, then I won't consider yours either. I'll make the best decision for Luna and for us to be happy. He clearly never expected me to bring up divorce. He looked at me in shock and scoffed. You're talking about divorce? You couldn't possibly raise Luna on your own, he said. Sure, single parenting is tough, but it's a lot better than continuing like this, I answered. Ethan said, if you're going that far, then go ahead and file for divorce. I'll even sign the papers. Just remember, if you change your mind later and decide you don't want a divorce after all, it'll be too late. Did you think I would back down? I replied. I took out the divorce papers I had already prepared and handed them to him with a pen. When he saw the divorce papers, he froze. He just stared at me and didn't make a move to fill them out. What's wrong? You're going to fill out the divorce papers, right? I asked. He hesitated. I pushed him to take the pen and fill them out. Come on, you said you would, didn't you? No, I was just joking, he stammered. A joke? After you said it was too late if I changed my mind later, you dared me to divorce you, and now you're too scared to go through with it? Pathetic, I said. Shut up, I'll fill it out, okay? He said angrily. He signed his part and handed the papers to me. There, I signed it. Happy now? Get out. You're annoying. I calmly replied, no, you're the one who's leaving. What? He said, clearly confused. Haven't you forgotten that this apartment is under my name? Ever since you started supporting your sister, Even with your contribution to our living expenses, it wasn't enough. I've been the one covering all the rent, I explained. Yet you still had the audacity to keep living here without any guilt? Are you stupid? Are you out of your mind? I yelled. Suddenly, a voice cried out from behind. Wait a minute, what's going on here? It was Amy, my sister-in-law. She ran up to Ethan and grabbed him by the collar. You said we could stay here forever, right? So you were lying? She demanded. Amy, no, this isn't, Ethan tried to explain. What do you mean, this isn't? I trusted you because I thought you would keep us here forever. I can't believe you're kicking us out, she shouted. I didn't think it would turn out like this either, Ethan said weakly. You can't even deal with your own wife, can you? I snapped. What did you say? Ethan asked, anger rising. I'd had enough of their bickering. I walked over and threw Amy and her children's things out the front door. Hey, wait, what do you think you're doing? Amy yelled as she approached me angrily. But now that I'd decided to divorce Ethan, I didn't feel any obligation to protect her. I wasn't throwing away my own things. I was getting rid of someone else's. Actually, you're trespassing. Can you leave as soon as possible? I said quietly. Amy froze, shivering at my tone, and stepped back. Hey, you don't have to throw out our stuff. And you, Ethan, I turned to my ex-husband. Could you please leave us as well? I don't need either of you anymore. What kind of thing is that to say to your husband? Ethan asked, surprised. You're not my husband anymore, you're my ex-husband, I replied calmly. I never thought you were such a cold-hearted woman, he muttered. Well, that's too bad for you, I said. You've stepped on my landmine. If you find your sister and her child cuter than our own child, then why don't you three happily live together? Where are we supposed to go if we leave here? Are you really kicking us out? Amy asked. I don't care, do whatever you want, now get out. I'm going to call the cops if you don't leave. After they reluctantly left, I closed the door behind them. I probably wouldn't see them again. As I looked around the room, I noticed my daughter staring at me with a confused look. Mama, where did Daddy go? She asked. I'm sorry, Luna, do you think it's okay if it's just Mama and you from now on? I replied. My daughter hesitated for a moment, but then her smile returned. I'll be okay as long as Mama's here. I'm fine as long as I'm with you, she said, running up to me. I hugged her tightly. That's right, even without my husband, we would be fine. The two of us could still be happy. Later, I sent all their belongings to my husband's parents' house and explained the situation over the phone. It seems my husband and his sister's family had gone back to their parents' house, but they were disowned and kicked out by their furious parents. As a result, my ex-husband rented a small apartment where he now lives with his sister and niece. As a family of 3, they probably wanted that, so I didn't care. I later found out that the reason my sister-in-law argued with her husband was because of her spending habits. Now, her husband is asking her to repay the money she spent, almost every day. My ex-husband has been sending me annoying texts like, I was wrong, so forgive me, I love you and Luna the most, I want us to be a family again. Of course, I didn't reply to any of them, and they were quickly deleted from my inbox. Luna doesn't want to see her dad at all, so we have no plans to meet him. I plan to move out of this place soon because it would be a problem if they came here. For my daughter, I want to give her all the love and everything she deserves, even without a father. I want her to live a happy life. My name is Madison, and my story begins when my mom married my dad, though he wasn't just my dad at the time. He was also Kayla's dad, having gone through a divorce when Kayla was only 2. Looking back, I have to admit our family situation was pretty unique. Unlike the stereotypical evil stepmother scenario you see in movies, my mom actually got along great with Kayla's mom. They'd chat on the phone, coordinate visits, and even have coffee together sometimes. Kayla would come over on weekends and holidays, and initially, everything was perfect. We were close in age, and despite being stepsisters, we clicked immediately. We'd spend hours playing together, sharing secrets, and doing all the things sisters do. I remember how we'd build blanket forts in the living room and stay up late watching movies, trying to stifle our giggles so our parents wouldn't hear us. But as we got older, things started to change. High school brought new friends, different interests, and slowly but surely, we began drifting apart. Kayla found her own crowd, and I noticed she was becoming, well, less tidy would be putting it mildly. "Kayla, could you please pick up your stuff from the bathroom?" I'd ask, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. Yeah, I'll do it later," she'd reply, not even looking up from her phone. But later never seemed to come. Instead, my mom would eventually tell me to clean up after her. "Madison, honey, just take care of it," Mom would say. "She's our guest, after all." I'd grit my teeth and do it, but each time it happened, a tiny seed of resentment took root. Still, I kept my mouth shut. What else could I do? Even then, I was the responsible one, the one who understood the importance of maintaining peace in our blended family. After high school, I threw myself into college life. I worked hard, studied harder, and started saving every penny I could from my part-time jobs. My grandparents, Mom's parents, were always supportive, telling me how proud they were of my independence. After graduation, I landed a good job, the kind with benefits and regular hours. The pay was decent enough that I could start looking for my own place, though renting at first. Every month, I'd put aside a chunk of my salary, watching my savings grow slowly but surely. My parents were supportive too, in their own way. They'd stop by my rental apartment with home-cooked meals and random household items they thought I might need. But it was my grandparents who really helped make my dream of homeownership a reality. Between my savings, their generous contribution, and my parents' help with renovation costs and furniture, I finally bought my own place. That first night in my new apartment, I stood in the middle of my living room, breathing in the fresh paint smell and feeling like I'd finally made it. Everything was exactly where I wanted it, including the antique dining set my great-grandmother had left me and the expensive bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. 6 months after I moved in, Mom called. "Honey, I need to ask you a favor," she said over the phone. Her voice had that sweet, careful tone she uses when she wants something big. "It's about Kayla." I felt my stomach tighten. "What about her?" "She's found a job here in the city. Isn't that wonderful?" Mom paused for effect. "But she needs a place to stay while she gets settled. Just for a couple of months." I gripped my phone tighter. "Mom, she can't afford rent yet, and you have that spare room," Mom continued. "It would mean so much to all of us. You know how hard it is starting out." I closed my eyes, remembering all those times Kayla had left our house looking like a tornado hit it when we were younger. But maybe she'd grown up. Maybe she'd changed. It was only for 2 months, right? "Okay," I heard myself say. "But just for 2 months." "Oh, sweetie, thank you. You're such a good sister," Mom gushed. "Kayla will be there tomorrow." Kayla breezed in with 4 massive suitcases and immediately started unpacking, by which I mean she started throwing her clothes everywhere. Within an hour, my pristine living room looked like a clothing bomb had exploded. That night, I came home from work to find dirty dishes piled in the sink and half-eaten takeout containers scattered across the kitchen counter. Kayla was sprawled on my couch, watching TV. "Hey, could you wash your dishes?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "I'll get to it," she said, not looking away from the screen. She never got to it. Days passed, and the situation only got worse. One morning, I opened my closet to find several of my favorite outfits missing. I found them later, in Kayla's room, crumpled on the floor. "What the hell, Kayla?" I confronted her. "Why are you taking my clothes without asking?" She rolled her eyes. "Come on, we're the same size. Don't be so uptight about it. We're sisters, remember?" "Sisters ask permission," I muttered, but she was already walking away. The final straw was the food situation. I'd always enjoyed cooking, making enough for leftovers to take to work the next day. But now, I'd come home to find everything I'd made the night before completely gone, with nothing prepared in return. "Kayla, you can't keep eating all the food without contributing," I said one evening, standing in front of my empty fridge. She looked up from her phone, annoyed. "I'm a guest here, Madison. You're the host, you're supposed to take care of your guests." Besides, this isn't even my kitchen. Guest or not, you need to help out, I insisted. Whatever, she shrugged. If you're going to be so weird about it, I'll just order takeout. I stood there, watching her scroll through her delivery apps, feeling my blood pressure rise. This wasn't what I'd signed up for. But every time I thought about confronting her more seriously, I heard my mom's voice in my head, "You're such a good sister." 2 weeks into this nightmare of cohabitation, I was already counting down the days until my apartment would be mine again. Work had been particularly rough that day, and all I wanted was to come home, heat up some leftovers, if there were any, and collapse on my couch. Instead, I walked into darkness. At first, I thought maybe Kayla had finally gone out for the evening, giving me some peace and quiet. But then I noticed the flickering light coming from my living room. As I turned the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, at my dining table, using my great-grandmother's antique dining set that I barely used myself because of how precious it was to me, sat Kayla and some guy I'd never seen before. Candles were lit everywhere, creating what was supposed to be a romantic atmosphere. They were leaning in close to each other, giggling and kissing between bites of what looked like takeout arranged on my family heirlooms. But what really made my blood boil was the open bottle on the table, my bottle. The expensive wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, now half empty between these two strangers. I slapped the light switch on. "What the hell is this?" Kayla jumped, then rolled her eyes when she saw it was me. "Oh my God, Madison, you scared us." "Who is this?" I demanded, pointing at the guy who was now giving me an annoyed look. "And why are you using my great-grandmother's china? And that wine was expensive and saved for a special occasion." "This is Derek," Kayla said casually, as if this was all perfectly normal. "And this is a special occasion, it's our third date." "I don't care if it's your wedding dinner. You have no right to bring strangers into my home without asking, and you definitely have no right to use my things without permission." Derek cleared his throat. "Hey, we're trying to have a romantic evening here. Could you give us some privacy? Maybe go grab coffee somewhere or stay at a friend's place tonight?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Excuse me?" "Yeah," Kayla chimed in, wrapping an arm around Derek's shoulders. "We'd appreciate some alone time. It's not cool to crash someone's date like this." "Crash someone's date? This is my apartment. Come on, sis," Kayla whined. "Don't be such a buzzkill. We just want to spend some quality time together." "Quality time? Get out." I pointed at Derek. "You need to leave right now." "Or what?" Derek smirked. "Or I'm calling the police and having you removed for trespassing." "You wouldn't dare," Kayla gasped. I pulled out my phone and started dialing. "Try me." Derek's smirk vanished. He stood up, grabbing his jacket. "Whatever. This is ridiculous, I'm out of here." "Derek, wait," Kayla called after him as he headed for the door. She turned to glare at me. "Thanks a lot, Madison. Thanks for ruining everything." She grabbed her purse and stormed out after him, slamming the door so hard my pictures rattled on the walls. My phone rang early the next morning. Mom's name flashed across the screen, and I already knew this wasn't going to be good. "How could you?" she started before I could even say hello. "Your own sister." "Mom, let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you humiliated that poor girl in front of her date. How you threatened to call the police on her." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Did she tell you she was using great-grandma's china? Or that she opened my expensive wine without asking?" "Oh, Madison," Mom's voice dripped with disappointment. "When did you become so selfish? So arrogant? Your sister is trying to build a life here, and you're treating her like a criminal. She brought a complete stranger into my home without. She's an unhappy girl who needs her family's support right now. But clearly, you're too wrapped up in your own little world to see that." Before I could defend myself further, Mom hung up. I stared at my phone, feeling a mixture of anger and hurt bubbling up inside me. But I didn't have long to process, because barely an hour later, my phone rang again. This time it was Kayla's mom. Madison, her voice was sharp. "We need to talk about your behavior." "My behavior?" I couldn't help but laugh. "What about Kayla's behavior?" "You know, ever since you bought that apartment, you've changed. Become arrogant, selfish. That's not fair." "Not fair?" "I'll tell you what's not fair. Have you forgotten when you and your mother first moved here? You stayed at our house for 2 weeks. Kayla and I treated you both with nothing but respect. We didn't kick you out or threaten to call the police on you." "That was completely different," I protested. "We didn't trash your house or use your personal belongings without permission. Look, I come home exhausted from work every day, and instead of resting, I'm cleaning up after Kayla. She doesn't wash dishes, doesn't do laundry." "You're being too strict with her," Kayla's mom cut me off. "She tells me how hard it is living with you, how biased you are against her. These are little things, Madison. You need to stop being so uptight about every little thing." "Little things?" "It's about basic respect. She doesn't appreciate anything I do, doesn't respect my home or my belongings. She's your sister. Well, if she doesn't like living with me, she's welcome to leave my apartment right now." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "I see," Kayla's mom's voice turned ice cold. "I'll be speaking to your father and mother about this. Don't think this is over." The line went dead. I sat there, my hands shaking with frustration. How had I become the villain in this story? All I wanted was some basic respect and consideration in my own home. Was that really too much to ask? My phone rang again a few hours later. Mom's name flashed on the screen for the second time that day. I almost didn't answer, but I knew ignoring her would only make things worse. My finger hovered over the decline button for a moment before I finally accepted the call, bracing myself for what was coming. "What is wrong with you?" She didn't even say hello. "I just got off the phone with Kayla's mother. She's incredibly upset." I slumped onto my couch, feeling a headache starting to form. "Mom, do you have any idea how hard I've worked to maintain this relationship with her? Your father's ex-wife and I have always gotten along wonderfully. I'm proud of that. And now you're ruining everything. Do you know how rare it is for divorced families to get along like we do?" "I'm ruining everything?" I sat up straight, my voice rising. "Mom, you promised me Kayla wouldn't interfere with my life. You said I'd barely see her, because she'd be at work all day. Well, guess what? It's been 2 weeks, and she hasn't gone to a single job interview. Not one. She's looking. No, she's not. She stays home all day, making a mess of my apartment, and bringing random guys over. You want to know what she's really doing? She sits on my couch all day watching TV shows and ordering takeout. She doesn't wash her clothes, doesn't cook, doesn't clean, won't even wash a single dish. Every day I come home from work to complete chaos. Do you know what it's like to work a full day and come home to find your kitchen destroyed and all your food eaten?" "Honey," Mom's voice took on that condescending tone I hated, the one she used when she thought she was being the voice of reason. "Kayla isn't used to living independently. She doesn't know how to do these things yet. She's never had to take care of herself before." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I paced around my living room, stepping over Kayla's discarded shoes. "She's an adult, Mom. She should know how to wash a dish. These aren't complicated skills we're talking about. This is basic human courtesy. You're the hostess, Madison. It's your responsibility to be hospitable and take care of your guests. This attitude of yours. I didn't raise you to be like this. I raised you to be generous and kind, especially to family." I felt the frustration building in my chest as my mother continued lecturing me about hospitality and family duty. Every word just reminded me of the constant disrespect I'd been enduring in my own home. The wine stains on my carpet caught my eye, remnants from Kayla's romantic dinner, and something inside me finally snapped. "You know what, Mom? I interrupted her mid-sentence, my voice rising with every word. I'm done trying to explain this to you. I'm done being the responsible one, the understanding one, the one who has to accommodate everything. I'm just completely tired of. I took a deep breath, my next words coming out in a burst of anger. I'm tired of Kayla behaving like a pig in my house. The moment those words left my mouth, I heard a small gasp behind me. My stomach dropped as I slowly turned around. There was Kayla, standing in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes wide. She must have come back to get something and heard everything. The look on her face made my anger evaporate instantly, replaced by a sickening wave of guilt. Kayla, I started, but she was already turning away. Madison, what's happening? My mom's voice was still coming through the phone, but I barely heard her. I watched, frozen in place, as Kayla walked straight to her room. I could hear her opening drawers and moving around. Within minutes, though it felt like hours, she emerged with her suitcases, the same ones she'd arrived with just 2 weeks ago. She didn't look at me as she walked past, didn't say a word. The only sound was the rolling of her suitcase wheels across my hardwood floors and then the soft click of the front door closing behind her. I stood there in the sudden silence, my phone still in my hand, my mother's voice a distant murmur. I hung up without saying goodbye. The following days were eerily quiet. No calls from my mother, no angry messages from Kayla's mom, nothing. The silence was worse than the arguing had been. I knew Kayla must have told her mother what happened, and her mother must have told mine, but no one was saying anything to me. The weight of that silence pressed down on me every day as I moved through my now spotless apartment. A week passed like this, until there was a knock at my door one evening. I opened it to find both my parents standing there. Mom's face was set in that expression I remembered from childhood, the one that meant I was in serious trouble. Dad looked tired. They came in, and Mom didn't waste any time. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she started, pacing my living room. "Calling your sister a pig? Making her feel so unwelcome that she had to leave in the middle of the night? I didn't raise you to be cruel, Madison." She continued listing my sins, each one delivered like a prosecutor at trial. I noticed Dad hadn't said anything yet, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking around my apartment. Mom noticed too. She turned to him suddenly. "Why are you just standing there silent? Say something to your daughter. Tell her how disappointed you are." Dad cleared his throat, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Actually," he said slowly, "I think both of our daughters are wrong in this situation." "What?" Mom and I said simultaneously. "Madison," he turned to me, his voice gentle but firm, "calling your sister a pig was wrong. It was hurtful, and it's the reason she left. You need to apologize for that." I nodded, feeling the shame fresh again. "But," he continued, holding up a hand as Mom started to speak, "I otherwise support Madison in this. Kayla needs to learn to behave like an adult, like an independent person. Maybe it will be the push she needs to start taking responsibility for her own life. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for our children is to let them face the consequences of their actions." My mother's face turned red. "Oh, so now you want to parent? Where were you when I was helping Kayla find a job? When I was coordinating with her mother? Why do I have to take care of your eldest daughter more than you do?" "That's not fair," Dad started, but Mom cut him off. "You know what's not fair? You sitting back silent all these years while I worked to keep this family together. Well, congratulations, now you can deal with your daughters yourself." Then she turned back to me, her anger finding a new target. "And you? You think you can just throw your sister out whenever you feel like it?" "This is my property," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I can do what I want with it." Mom laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your property? You think you did this all by yourself? Almost everything in this apartment was bought with our money." She gestured wildly around the room before pointing dramatically at the bookcase against the wall. "That bookcase belonged to my grandmother. It's a family heirloom, which means it's my furniture, not yours. I stood there for a moment, looking at the bookcase my mother was pointing at. Then, without a word, I walked over to it and started taking the books off the shelves. "What are you doing?" Mom demanded. "Packing up your furniture," I replied, my hands shaking slightly as I continued emptying the shelves. I went to my storage closet and pulled out some moving boxes I'd kept from when I first moved in. "Madison, stop this," Dad said quietly, but I ignored him. "Don't worry, Mom," I said, starting to break down the bookcase. "A courier will deliver this to your house tomorrow. Since it's your furniture, you should have it." Mom grabbed her purse. "I can't deal with this right now. This isn't the daughter I raised." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Dad stood there awkwardly for a moment. "Madison, you should go after her, Dad." He nodded sadly, then followed Mom out. I heard him call for a taxi in the hallway. True to my word, I had the bookcase delivered to my mother's house the next day. After that, silence fell over our family again. No calls, no texts, no family dinners. Just silence. A month passed like this. I threw myself into work, trying not to think about how everything had fallen apart. Then one afternoon, my phone lit up with my dad's number. "Can we meet for coffee?" he asked. "That little cafe near your office?" "Sure," I agreed, grateful that at least someone in my family was still talking to me. But when I walked into the cafe the next day, I stopped short. There at the table with my father sat Kayla, nervously stirring a cup of coffee. For a moment, I considered turning around and walking out, but Dad had already seen me and waved me over. I took a deep breath and approached the table. No one spoke as I sat down. Kayla stared into her coffee cup, and I focused on arranging my purse on the back of my chair. Dad cleared his throat but didn't say anything. The awkward silence stretched on until a waitress came to take my order, giving us all a moment to collect ourselves. Finally, Kayla looked up. "So," she started, then paused to take a breath. "I got a job." That's great," I managed. "Yeah, it is. And I found my own apartment. It's small, but it's nice. I can actually afford it now with my new salary." She smiled slightly. "And, I'm still dating Derek. He thinks it's hilarious now. Keeps calling you the fighting girl. Says he's never seen anyone go from zero to calling the cops so fast." Despite everything, I found myself chuckling. Well, he was being pretty obnoxious. He was, Kayla admitted. We both were. She set down her coffee cup and looked me directly in the eyes. "Madison, I'm really sorry. For everything. The mess, the disrespect, using your things without asking. I was acting like a spoiled teenager instead of an adult." I felt something tight in my chest begin to loosen. "I'm sorry too. I shouldn't have called you a pig. That was cruel, and I regret it. I was just so frustrated." "I know. I gave you plenty of reasons to be frustrated." Kayla reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Living on my own now, having to actually take care of everything myself, I get it. I get why you were so angry about the dishes and the cleaning and everything else." Since that day at the cafe, Kayla and I have been rebuilding our relationship. We meet for coffee regularly now, and she's actually become quite good at keeping her new apartment clean. She even invited me over for dinner recently, cooked it herself and everything. Things with Mom, though, that's a different story. Dad tells me she's not ready to reconcile yet. She needs time to think, he says, but I know it's more complicated than that. Mom has always prided herself on maintaining the perfect blended family, and I think my conflict with Kayla shattered that illusion for her. I stand by my actions, though. Yes, I could have handled some things better, but I don't believe I owe an apology to Mom or Kayla's mother for expecting basic respect in my own home. Yesterday, something interesting happened. A courier delivered a familiar bookcase to my apartment, the same one I'd sent to Mom months ago, in a fit of anger. There was no note, no explanation, just the bookcase. As I stood there looking at it, I couldn't help but wonder if this was Mom's way of extending an olive branch. I haven't called her about it yet. Some wounds need more time to heal, and some conversations need the right moment. For now, I put the bookcase back in its old spot, and every time I look at it, I think about how families are like books. Sometimes they need to be taken apart and put back together before they can stand properly again. My name is Madeline, and 12 years ago, I met James at a business networking event. He was a senior manager at a trading company, charming and intelligent, with kind eyes that made me feel at ease. What really won me over, though, was how he talked about his 13-year-old daughter, Sarah. The love in his voice when he mentioned her name was unmistakable. I'd built my chain of beauty salons from the ground up, and success had brought me everything except what I wanted most, a family. I couldn't have children of my own, a fact I'd learned to live with, but meeting James and Sarah felt like a second chance. We got married 6 months later, and they moved into my house. The income difference between James and me was substantial. I made several times what he did, but it never bothered me. Love isn't about money, and I was just happy to finally have the family I'd always wanted. When Sarah turned 16, I bought her first car, a safe, reliable model that made her squeal with joy. "This is really mine," she'd asked, tears in her eyes as she hugged me. "Thank you, Madeline. You're the best." 2 years later, when college acceptance letters started arriving, I didn't hesitate to offer to pay for her education. It wasn't Harvard, but it was a good school, and Sarah was thrilled. Those early years were beautiful. We were happy. I had everything I'd ever wanted, a loving husband, a stepdaughter who seemed to appreciate me, and a home filled with laughter. Sarah even stayed with us after college, saying she wanted to save money while starting her career. I'll never forget that spring evening when Sarah came home practically glowing with excitement. She'd been dating Michael for 2 years, and I knew him well, a decent young man who worked as a software engineer and treated her like a princess. Still, when she burst through the door waving her left hand with a diamond ring sparkling on it, I was genuinely surprised. "Dad, Madeline," he proposed, she squealed, bouncing on her toes like she was 16 again instead of 25. "We're getting married." James jumped up to hug her while I stood there grinning like an idiot. This was exactly the kind of family moment I'd always dreamed of having. Michael came over later that evening, and we opened a bottle of champagne I'd been saving for a special occasion. "I know this is a big ask," Sarah said, looking nervous as she played with her engagement ring. "But we've been looking at venues and everything, and—" "How much?" I asked, already reaching for my phone to check my accounts. "Well, with everything included, around 150,000, she said quietly, then rushed to add, "but of course, we don't expect—" "Done," I interrupted, smiling. "I'll set up an account tomorrow that you can access for all the wedding expenses." The look of relief and joy on her face made every penny worth it. "Really? Oh my God, Madeline, thank you so much." She threw her arms around me, and I hugged her back tightly, remembering that teenage girl who'd first welcomed me into her life. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of excitement. Sarah included me in everything at first. We'd sit at the kitchen table late into the night, looking at wedding magazines and Pinterest boards. She'd text me pictures of dresses she was considering and ask my opinion on color schemes. "What do you think about these flowers?" she'd ask, showing me photos of elaborate bouquets. "Too much? Not enough?" "I love the pink peonies," I'd say, and she'd make notes in her wedding planner. She found her dream dress, a stunning designer gown that cost more than my first car, and I didn't even blink at the price tag. The way her eyes lit up when she tried it on was worth every cent. The venue she chose was spectacular, an elegant historic hotel downtown with crystal chandeliers and marble floors. The menu she selected featured premium dishes that would impress any food critic. I transferred the money as promised, and Sarah dove into the planning with enthusiasm. But then, about 2 months into the planning, something shifted. The detailed updates became shorter, vaguer. Instead of our long planning sessions, she'd rush through dinner and disappear into her room or go to Michael's place. "How's the planning going?" I'd ask. "Fine," she'd reply, barely looking up from her phone. "Everything's on track." When I'd try to get more specific details, she'd give non-committal answers. "Oh, just finalizing some things." Or, "Don't worry, it's all under control." I told myself not to be hurt by this gradual exclusion. After all, planning a wedding is stressful, and she was probably just overwhelmed. Maybe she needed some space to make her own decisions. I remembered being young and wanting to prove I could handle things on my own. James noticed my concern one night as we got ready for bed. "Everything okay?" he asked. "You seem worried." "I'm probably just being silly," I said, trying to smile. "It's just, Sarah seems different lately. More distant." "She's just busy with the wedding," he assured me, kissing my forehead. "You know how it is, so many details to manage. Try not to worry." I nodded and tried to push my concerns aside. But there was a nagging feeling in my gut that something wasn't quite right. The happy bubble we'd been living in felt like it was starting to develop tiny cracks, and I couldn't shake the sensation that this was just the beginning. As the weeks passed, I decided to take a more active role in the wedding planning again. One morning, over coffee, I casually brought up something that had been on my mind. "Sarah, honey, I was wondering about the guest list," I said, watching her scroll through her phone. "Have you figured out how many people you're inviting?" She looked up briefly. "Oh, yeah, we're keeping it small, about 50 people." "That's nice, intimate," I nodded, then added, "I'd love to include my parents and my sister. They've always adored you, and they'd be thrilled to be there." The change in Sarah's expression was immediate and startling. Her face hardened, and she put down her phone with deliberate slowness. "Actually, we're only inviting close relatives and friends. This is supposed to be a really personal celebration. I don't want to include people who aren't, actually family." The words hit me like ice water. After 12 years, after everything we'd shared, my family wasn't actually family to her? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice gentle. "Sarah, I understand wanting to keep things intimate, but my parents have known you since you were 13. They'd been to every one of your birthdays, your graduation." I paused, then added quietly, "And I am paying for the entire wedding. Surely we can make an exception for 3 people who care about you." Her face immediately twisted into a pout, and I could see the anger flash in her eyes at the mention of money. She pushed her chair back from the table with more force than necessary. "Fine," she snapped. "I'll send invitations to your mom and sister. Happy now?" Before I could respond, she grabbed her phone and stormed out of the kitchen. I heard the front door slam a few minutes later. That evening, James came into our bedroom with that look on his face, the one that told me I wasn't going to like what he had to say. "We need to talk about what happened with Sarah today," he began, sitting on the edge of our bed. "Okay," I said, putting down my book. "What about it?" "She called me crying earlier. Said you were really rude to her about the guest list. She's staying at Michael's tonight because she's so upset." I stared at him in disbelief. "Rude to her?" "James, she told me my family wasn't welcome at her wedding, a wedding I'm paying for, by the way. And I stayed completely calm when I talked to her about it." "I know, but maybe you could be a little more gentle with her," he suggested. "She's under a lot of stress with the wedding planning." I explained exactly what had happened, word for word, and I could see him processing it. He ran his hand through his hair, something he always did when he was troubled. "Okay," he finally said. "I see what you mean. I'll talk to her about it tomorrow." The next 2 weeks passed in an uneasy peace. Sarah had returned home and was acting as if nothing had happened, chattering about wedding details over breakfast and asking my opinion about centerpieces again. But something felt off, like the calm before a storm. Then came the bombshell at dinner. "So," Sarah said, pushing her pasta around her plate, "Mom found out about the wedding. She's back in town." I nearly choked on my wine. James's fork clattered against his plate. In 12 years, Sarah's mother, Linda, had barely been mentioned in our house. I knew the basics. She'd had a drinking problem, which led to the divorce, then moved to Arizona and essentially abandoned Sarah. No birthday cards, no Christmas calls, nothing. She really wants to be involved in the wedding planning, Sarah continued, her voice bright with an enthusiasm I couldn't understand. Actually, I invited her over for dinner this weekend. Here. My hand tightened around my wine glass. This was my house, the house I'd bought with my own money, the house where I'd created a home for us all. The proper thing would have been for Sarah to ask permission before inviting someone over, especially someone with Linda's history. But I remembered the guest list argument and bit my tongue. One more confrontation wasn't worth it. James sat there silently, suddenly very interested in his pasta. That weekend, I spent hours preparing a perfect dinner, herb-crusted rack of lamb, roasted vegetables, homemade bread. I wanted everything to be flawless, though I couldn't explain why I felt the need to impress a woman who'd abandoned her daughter. Linda arrived exactly 30 minutes late. She was tall and blonde like Sarah, but with hard edges where Sarah was soft. Her eyes scanned every inch of my home as she walked in, lingering on the artwork, the furniture, the view from the windows. I recognized the look, envy poorly disguised as appraisal. "What a large house," she said, emphasizing large in a way that made it sound like an insult. Dinner started pleasantly enough, but it didn't stay that way. Linda took a bite of the lamb and pursed her lips. She said, cutting another piece with deliberate slowness. "You know, I always made this with rosemary and garlic. It really brings out the flavor better. Sarah used to love it when I made it." I took a sip of wine and said nothing. "And these vegetables," she continued, pushing them around her plate. "They're a bit overdone, aren't they? I always found that keeping them crispy makes them so much more appetizing." With each criticism, I waited for James to say something, anything. He'd been married to this woman, he knew exactly who she was and what she was doing. But he kept his eyes on his plate, cutting his food into smaller and smaller pieces. I sat there, watching this woman criticize my cooking in my own home, while my husband stayed silent and my stepdaughter beamed at her long-lost mother as if she'd hung the moon. Something inside me shifted, hardened. As dinner wound down, Linda dabbed her lips with her napkin and turned to Sarah. "So, honey, tell me about the venue. Which hotel did you pick?" "The Grand Morrison downtown," Sarah replied, brightening at the change of subject. "It's beautiful, Mom. They have these amazing crystal chandeliers and—" "The Grand Morrison?" Linda's face wrinkled with distaste. "Oh, sweetie, you can't have your wedding there. That place is so basic. Now, the Belmont Plaza, that's where you should be having it. Much more prestigious." I gripped my fork tighter, knowing the Belmont Plaza cost nearly twice what we were already spending. "The wedding we're planning isn't exactly cheap," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "The Grand Morrison is a lovely venue." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Well, you can't cut corners on your only daughter's wedding. It's the most important day of her life." Something inside me snapped. 12 years of love, support, and financial sacrifice reduced to cutting corners by a woman who hadn't sent her daughter so much as a birthday card. "If you're so concerned about the venue," I said, meeting her gaze directly, "feel free to pay for the Belmont Plaza yourself. Since I'm the one covering the entire $150,000 for this wedding, I think the Grand Morrison will do just fine." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's face flushed red. She stood up so quickly, her chair scraped against the floor. "I can see I'm not welcome here," she announced, grabbing her purse. "Sarah, call me tomorrow, honey." She stormed out, the front door slamming behind her. Sarah whirled on me, her face contorted with rage. "How dare you?" she screamed. "How dare you throw the money in Mom's face like that? You're cruel and greedy, and you've ruined everything." She ran upstairs, and I heard her door slam too. I sat there, stunned, as James helped himself to another glass of wine. Later that night, he came to our bedroom looking stern. "You need to apologize to Sarah," he said. "What you said to Linda was completely out of line." I stared at him in disbelief. "Apologize? For what? Telling the truth? Your ex-wife came into my house, criticized everything I did, and then suggested I was being cheap about a wedding I'm paying for entirely on my own. Still, you didn't have to embarrass her like that. And now Sarah's upset." "I'm not apologizing," I said firmly. "Not this time." He grabbed his pillow. "Fine. I'll sleep in the living room until you come to your senses." The next morning, my phone rang while I was making coffee alone in the kitchen. It was my mother. "Maddie, honey," she said, her voice concerned. "I wanted to ask you about Sarah's wedding. What's the date and venue?" "Dad and I haven't received an invitation yet, and neither has Jenny. I thought they must have gotten lost in the mail." I sat at the kitchen counter for hours after my mother's call, my coffee going cold beside me. The morning sun crawled across the floor as I waited, my anger building with each passing minute. Around 11, I heard Sarah's key in the lock. She'd been out since breakfast, probably with Linda. "Sarah," I called out, my voice steady, despite the rage simmering inside me. "We need to talk." She walked into the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes. "What is it?" she asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "I just got a call from my mother," I said, watching her face carefully. She was asking about the wedding invitations, the ones that apparently never arrived. Sarah's expression hardened, a look I'd never seen before crossing her face. She lifted her chin defiantly. "I'm not inviting them." "Excuse me?" "I'm not inviting strangers to my wedding," she said, each word deliberately cruel. The word strangers hit me like a physical blow. My parents had been at every Christmas, every birthday, every milestone for 12 years. My sister had helped Sarah prepare for her college interviews. Strangers? "That's wrong, Sarah," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "And it's ugly. These people have loved you and supported you for years." She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound I'd never heard from her before. "You want to talk about ugly? After what you did to my mom last night?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "Actually, you know what? I don't want you at my wedding either." Time seemed to stop. The kitchen fell silent except for the quiet hum of the refrigerator. 12 years of love, support, and sacrifice reduced to this moment. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You don't want me, the person paying for your entire wedding, to attend?" "That's right," she said, lifting her chin higher. I felt an odd sense of calm wash over me. All the hurt and anger of the past few weeks crystallized into perfect clarity. I smiled, which seemed to unnerve her slightly. "That's fine," I said, my voice pleasantly light. "I won't come to your wedding." Without another word, I walked upstairs to my home office. My hands didn't shake at all as I logged into my banking app and revoked Sarah's access to the wedding account. It took less than a minute, just a few clicks to end what had taken 12 years to build. Next, I called Robert, the wedding planner. He answered on the second ring. "Robert, this is Madeline Harrison. I need you to cancel all the wedding arrangements." Excuse me?" He sounded bewildered. "Is everything all right?" "No, it's not," I said honestly. "But it will be. Please cancel everything and process the refund to my account." The Grand Morrison was my next call. The events manager was apologetic but firm. They couldn't refund the deposit for the food and beverages that had already been ordered. It was a few $1,000s lost, but at that moment, it felt like money well spent. That evening, the house was silent. James was still sleeping in the living room. I could hear him shifting on the couch as I got ready for bed. As I lay there alone in the dark, I realized I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt free. The next morning, I took my time getting dressed. I chose my favorite blue silk blouse and pearl earrings, armor, for what I knew would be a difficult day. When I finally went downstairs for breakfast, the storm broke immediately. Sarah and James were already at the kitchen table, clearly waiting for me. The moment I appeared, Sarah leaped to her feet, her face red with fury. "What did you do?" she screamed. "How dare you cancel my wedding? How dare you block my access to the account? That money was for my wedding." I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands steady. "I'm not going to sponsor a wedding I'm not invited to," I said simply, taking a sip. "You can't do this." Sarah's voice rose higher, tears starting to stream down her face. "You've ruined everything. The venue, the flowers, the dress, it's all gone." I set my coffee cup down carefully. "Actually, I can do this," and I did. "Why don't you ask the people you actually want at your wedding to pay for it?" Sarah's face crumpled. She let out a horrible, gasping sob and ran from the kitchen. Her footsteps thundered up the stairs, followed by the slam of her bedroom door. James stood up slowly, his face dark with anger. "Fix this," he growled. "Right now. Call everyone back, reopen the account, and arrange everything again. Or I'll file for divorce." The threat hung in the air between us. 12 years of marriage reduced to this moment. I looked at the man I'd loved, really looked at him, and wondered how I'd never seen this side of him before. "Okay," I said calmly. "File for divorce, I'm not against it." The color drained from his face. He clearly hadn't expected this response. "Madeline, you can't be serious." "I am. And since this is my house, I'd like you and Sarah to leave by tomorrow." His anger deflated like a punctured balloon. "Look," he said, his tone suddenly conciliatory, "I overreacted. We need to talk about this, think it through." "I've already thought it through," I interrupted. "I'm done living with people who don't appreciate or respect me. I'm done trying to buy love." The rest of the day passed in a blur of slammed doors and muffled arguments upstairs. At exactly 7 that evening, James and Sarah appeared in the foyer with their suitcases. Sarah's eyes were red and puffy from crying. "I never thought you could be so cruel," she spat. I felt a laugh bubble up inside me, a genuine laugh of disbelief. "Cruel? I paid for your clothes, your car, your education. I gave you a home, loved you like my own daughter, and was ready to spend $150,000 on your wedding. And you have the nerve to call me cruel, because I won't let you treat me like dirt." The door closed behind them with a quiet click, so much gentler than all the angry slams of the past few days. I stood in my foyer, and listened to the silence of my house. The house felt different after they left, lighter somehow, as if a weight I hadn't known I was carrying had been lifted. I spent the first few days reorganizing spaces, reclaiming rooms that had slowly become filled with Sarah's things over the years. It was therapeutic, like cleaning out an old wound. Then came the message from Michael's mother. It popped up on my social media one evening while I was enjoying a glass of wine on my patio. "I hope you realize what you've done," the message read. "This wedding could fail entirely because of your actions. How can you be so heartless?" I took my time responding, choosing my words carefully. "I'm not heartless," I wrote back. "I'm just done being disrespected. I won't pay for a wedding I'm not even invited to. If you're so concerned about the wedding's success, feel free to pay for it yourself." She read the message, but never replied. I imagined her sitting there, probably as shocked as James had been that I wouldn't back down. It's funny how people react when you finally stand up for yourself, like they can't quite believe you've stopped playing by their rules. I contacted my lawyer the next day. She'd helped me draft the prenup 12 years ago, and now she'd helped me end the marriage it had protected. The divorce papers were ready within a week. When I called James to tell him they were ready, he tried his old tactics again. "Maddie, please," he said, his voice soft and pleading, the voice that used to make my heart melt. "We can start over. We can fix this." I hung up. He came to get the papers the next morning. He looked older somehow, tired. The confident man who'd threatened me with divorce was gone, replaced by someone who seemed lost. "Sarah's been crying nonstop," he said, standing in my foyer, no longer our foyer. The wedding's going to be at City Hall now. No reception, no flowers, no fancy dress. Just a basic ceremony. I shrugged, remembering all the tears I'd shed over their betrayal. That's not my problem. How can you be so cold about this? It's not cold, James. It's just not my responsibility anymore. He took the papers and left. I watched him walk to his car, the car I'd bought him, and drive away. It felt final, but not sad. Just finished. The divorce was completed 2 months later. The prenup made everything simple. He couldn't touch my house, my business, or any of my assets. Sometimes I wondered if he'd ever really read that document, if he'd understood what it meant when he signed it 12 years ago. It didn't matter now. People ask me sometimes if I know how Sarah's wedding went. If she wore the dress she'd chosen, if Linda was there, if it was everything she'd dreamed of. I honestly don't know. I blocked them all on social media, changed my phone number, moved on with my life. What I do know is this: you can't buy love. Not real love, anyway. You can't purchase respect or gratitude or loyalty. I spent 12 years trying to build a family with my checkbook, and in the end, all it got me was a front row seat to watch that family choose someone else over me. But here's the thing about endings: they're also beginnings. My house is peaceful now. My business is thriving. And when I sit in my garden with my morning coffee, watching the sun rise over my flowers, I don't feel lonely. I feel free. My name is Ashley, and I never thought my life would change so dramatically in just 1 year. Looking back now, I can't help but laugh at how naive I was about what I thought was my perfect marriage. 4 years ago, at age 30, I married Robert. We seemed like the perfect match. I was climbing the corporate ladder as a project manager at Richardson Financial, while he was content with his position as a manager at TradeWorks. Unlike many of my colleagues' husbands who were constantly chasing promotions, Robert preferred a simpler life. He'd come home early, cook dinner, and we'd spend quiet evenings together. I earned more than him, but it never seemed to bother him. In fact, he seemed to enjoy having a successful wife. "Honey, I made your favorite pasta tonight," he'd say almost every Friday, greeting me with a kiss as I walked through the door, exhausted from another long week of meetings and deadlines. "You spoil me too much," I'd reply, breathing in the familiar scent of garlic and herbs that filled our rented house. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our shared dreams. We were saving for our own place, and the joint account kept growing steadily. We had already saved $200,000, not enough for our dream home yet, but we were getting there. "We'll have our own place soon," Robert would say, scrolling through real estate listings on his phone while we cuddled on the couch. "Just another year or 2 of saving." I'd nod, imagining our future together. We talked about having kids someday, but we both agreed to wait until we had our own place. Everything seemed so clear, so certain. Then came that Tuesday in March. I remember it perfectly because it was the day everything started to unravel, though I didn't know it yet. I was in the middle of presenting quarterly projections to the board when the room started spinning. The faces around the conference table blurred, and the last thing I heard was someone shouting my name before everything went black. I woke up in the emergency room, surrounded by concerned faces and the steady beep of monitors. A doctor with kind eyes and graying hair was standing by my bed, holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Parker," he said gently, "we need to run some additional tests, but the preliminary scan shows something concerning. There appears to be a mass in your brain." The word mass echoed in my head like a death sentence. I felt my world tilting again, but this time I remained conscious, painfully aware of every word that followed. "We'll need to do more extensive testing to determine if it's benign and if surgery is possible," the doctor continued. "I need to be honest with you, even if surgery is an option, there's a significant risk of long-term disability." I nodded mechanically, my mind already racing to Robert. How would he take this news? Would he stay by my side if I became disabled? We had promised in sickness and in health, but this was different. This was real. I took a cab home from the hospital that evening, my mind racing with how to break the news to Robert. When I opened our front door, I found him in the kitchen, humming while stirring something that smelled like beef stew. The normalcy of it all made my heart ache. "Robert," I called out softly, still standing in the doorway. "I need to tell you something." He turned around, wooden spoon in hand, and must have seen something in my face, because the smile immediately dropped from his. "What's wrong, Ash?" I told him everything, the fainting spell, the hospital, the tumor. His face grew increasingly pale as I spoke, but what happened next caught me completely off guard. "Will you be able to keep working?" he asked, setting down the spoon. "What happens if you have to quit? Do we have enough money?" I stood there, stunned. My husband had just learned I might be dying or face permanent disability, and his first concern was about money? About my ability to work? "We have our savings," I managed to reply, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "It should be enough to get us through the initial period. We can figure out the rest later." Right, he nodded, running his hands through his hair. "The savings. Okay." The next few weeks were a blur of doctor's appointments and tests. I tried to maintain my normal work schedule, but it became increasingly difficult. The headaches were getting worse, and some days I could barely focus on my computer screen. "Ashley, you need to take some time off," my boss, Sarah Mitchell, finally said after finding me with my head in my hands one afternoon. "We can arrange for 6 months of medical leave. Your health has to come first." I knew she was right, but being at home all day was harder than I expected. The walls seemed to close in on me as I lay on the couch, wondering if each day might be one of my last. Would I die? Would I survive but never be the same? The questions tormented me endlessly. And then there was Robert's changing behavior. He started coming home later and later, sometimes well past midnight. When I asked him about it, he'd always have the same response. "I'm picking up extra shifts, Ash. We need the money for your treatment. You understand, right?" I'd nod, too exhausted from my own fears to probe further. Sometimes I'd hear him on the phone in another room, speaking in hushed tones, but I told myself he was probably just dealing with work stuff. My mind was occupied with darker thoughts. What would happen if the tumor was malignant? If I survived but ended up paralyzed? Would Robert stick around to take care of a disabled wife? After weeks of trying to handle everything on my own, I finally broke down and called my mother. I'd been avoiding it, not wanting to worry her at her age. She'd had me late in life and was now in her 70s. But I needed her, more than I'd ever needed her before. "Mom," I said when she answered the phone, my voice cracking. "I'm sick." As soon as I explained everything, she didn't hesitate. "I'm coming over right now, sweetheart. Pack my bag this minute." She arrived the next day. I was having one of my bad days, barely able to make it from the bedroom to the bathroom without getting dizzy. She took one look at me and switched into full mother mode, just like when I was a little girl with the flu. Having Mom there was like being wrapped in a warm blanket. She cooked, cleaned, made sure I took my medications on time, and most importantly, held my hand during the worst moments when the fear became overwhelming. But not everyone was happy about her presence. Robert's face would tighten every time he came home and found her there. He'd force a smile and retreat to the bedroom, or suddenly remember work emails he had to send. "Your mother doesn't have to stay here all the time," he said one night when we were alone. "I can take care of you." "But you're hardly ever home anymore," I pointed out. "Because I'm working," he snapped, then immediately softened his tone. "I'm working for us, Ash." Mom noticed the tension too. After 2 weeks, she announced she was heading home. "You seem stronger now, sweetheart," she said, though I could tell she was reluctant to leave. "But I'm just a phone call away if you need me." The next few weeks were a blur of medical tests and clinic visits. The house felt empty without Mom, and Robert was spending even more time away. But I forced myself to focus on my health, on getting through each day, on hoping for good news. Then finally, after what felt like an eternity, I got it. At my latest appointment, my doctor was actually smiling as he looked at my test results. "Mrs. Parker, I have good news," he said, and I felt my heart skip a beat. "The tumor is benign, and it's in a location where we can safely operate. The risk of complications is minimal." I burst into tears of relief. After all these weeks of uncertainty and fear, there was hope. Real hope. I couldn't wait to tell Robert. Maybe now things could go back to normal. Maybe all his strange behavior had just been stress about my condition. I practically floated out of the hospital, already planning how I would tell him the good news. I decided to head straight home, hoping to catch him before he left for work. I quietly inserted my key into the lock, but before I could open the door fully, I heard his voice from inside. He was talking loudly on the phone, apparently not expecting anyone home at this hour. "I can't take it anymore, Sarah. You don't know what it's like living with her," he was saying, his voice filled with disgust. "The constant smell of medicines in the house, her sickly appearance, it's just unbearable." My hand froze on the doorknob as he continued. I know. But you should see her now, she's nothing like the woman I married. Always weak, always complaining about headaches. I'm too young to be playing nurse to an invalid." Each word felt like a physical blow. I stood there, listening to my husband disparage me to another woman, my legs trembling beneath me. "Yeah, the money situation is being handled. We've got quite a bit in savings. Look, I'll figure something out. I just need to get out of this situation before she gets worse." I pushed the door open fully and stepped into the room. Robert spun around, the phone still pressed to his ear, his face draining of color when he saw me. "I'll call you back," he mumbled into the phone, ending the call. What was that all about? My voice came out steadier than I expected. For a moment, Robert just stared at me, caught off guard. Then his expression shifted, hardened. "Well, I guess you heard everything," he said, straightening his shoulders. "Maybe it's better this way. We need to talk." "Talk about what?" I asked, though I already knew what was coming. "I want a divorce, Ashley. And I want half of our savings." He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. "Let's be realistic, you're sick, and I'm not going to spend the best years of my life taking care of an invalid. I need someone young, healthy. I deserve that." I stood there, absorbing his words, thinking about the good news I'd just received from the doctor. But looking at Robert now, I realized it wouldn't make any difference. This wasn't about my illness, it was about who he really was. "We need to do this quickly," he continued, gaining confidence from my silence. "Before your surgery. I'm not risking being legally tied to a disabled person if something goes wrong." "Fine," I said quietly. "I agree to the divorce." He seemed surprised by my quick agreement, perhaps expecting tears or pleading. "Good," he said, recovering quickly. "I'll go to a hotel tonight. I don't want to stay here anymore. I'll come back tomorrow to pack my things." "That's probably best," I replied, my voice hollow. Robert grabbed his jacket and wallet, not even bothering to pack an overnight bag. At the door, he paused for a moment, like he might say something else, then shook his head and left. After Robert left, I stood in our living room for what felt like hours, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. Finally, I decided to start packing his things. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing him again tomorrow. As I moved around the house gathering his belongings, my eyes fell on his laptop, still open on the dining room table. I'd never been the type to snoop through my husband's things, but something compelled me to look at the screen. What I found made my knees buckle, and I had to grab the back of a chair for support. There, in full view, was a series of intimate messages between Robert and Sarah. As I scrolled through their conversation history, my stomach turned. There were explicit photos, intimate details of their encounters, and worst of all, cruel jokes about me. "Poor sick Ashley," Sarah had written. "At least her condition gives us more time together." "God, you should see her now," Robert had replied. "She looks like death warmed over. I can barely stand to look at her anymore." My hands were shaking as I continued scrolling, but what I found next made me gasp out loud. There was another conversation thread, this one with Amanda Wilson, my husband's boss's wife. The messages between them were equally intimate, filled with declarations of love and plans for secret meetings. "Does your husband suspect anything?" Robert had asked her. "John's clueless as always," she'd replied. "Too busy with work to notice what's happening under his nose." I felt sick, but I forced myself to keep reading. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures of everything, the messages, the photos, the timestamps. Something in me knew this might be important later. The divorce proceedings moved quickly after that. We didn't have much to untangle, no children, no property of our own. The house was rented, and our only joint asset was our savings account with the $200,000 we'd been saving for a down payment on a house. Money that had come primarily from my higher salary, though I'd never minded that imbalance before. Robert's lawyer, a shark in an expensive suit, had other ideas. "Your Honor," he argued during the proceedings, "while Mrs. Parker may have contributed more directly to the savings account, my client's contributions to the household were equally valuable. He managed all domestic duties, allowing Mrs. Parker to focus on her career. The money he earned went directly to household expenses, groceries, utilities, daily necessities." I watched as Robert nodded solemnly beside his lawyer, playing the role of the devoted house husband who'd sacrificed his own career advancement for our home. The same man who'd called me a burden just weeks before. The judge agreed with their argument. "The court finds that both parties contributed equally to the marriage, albeit in different ways. The savings will be divided equally between Mr. and Mrs. Parker." Just like that, half of our savings, $100,000, went to Robert. The money I'd worked so hard to save, stayed late at the office for, taken on extra projects for, was now being split with the man who'd betrayed me in every possible way. After the divorce was finalized, Robert moved out immediately. I couldn't stay in that apartment either, too many memories, too much pain. My mother welcomed me home with open arms, just as she had when I was a scared teenager after my first breakup. 2 months after the divorce, I finally had my surgery. The procedure went exactly as the doctors had hoped. They successfully removed the tumor, and my recovery began immediately. Each day, I felt a little stronger, a little more like my old self. During my recovery, I stayed with my mother. She was my rock, just as she'd always been, but I started noticing she seemed more tired than usual. One evening, as we sat in her cozy living room drinking tea, she took my hand. "Ashley, sweetheart, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I've made a decision about my future. I found a wonderful nursing home, Sunset Gardens. It's peaceful, has excellent care, and I've already paid for my stay there." She squeezed my hand. "I want to spend my remaining years somewhere I won't be a burden." "Mom, you're not a burden." "Let me finish," she interrupted with a smile. "I've thought this through. The house will be yours, along with my savings, about $300,000. You deserve a fresh start after everything you've been through." I tried to argue, but Mom had that determined look I knew so well. A week later, I helped her move into Sunset Gardens. The place was beautiful, with gardens and activities, and Mom seemed genuinely excited about this new chapter in her life. After getting her settled, I returned to what was now my house. It felt strange being there alone, but also peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. Life has a funny way of serving up moments of perfect timing. About a month after Mom's move, I was sitting in my favorite cafe, enjoying a quiet lunch break, when I heard a familiar voice. "Ashley, is that really you?" I looked up to see Robert's mother, Margaret, standing by my table, her face pale as if she'd seen a ghost. "Hello, Margaret," I said, gesturing for her to sit. "I can't believe it," she stammered. "Robert told us you were terminally ill," he said. She trailed off, looking embarrassed. I couldn't help but laugh. "He told you I was dying?" "Well, as you can see, I'm very much alive." Still working at Richardson Financial, actually. And Mom just left me her house. I'm planning to sell it and buy an apartment closer to work." Margaret's face went through a series of emotions before settling on something between shame and satisfaction. "You know," she said, leaning forward, "Robert's living with me now. That woman he left you for, Sarah, she took every penny he got from the divorce and then left him. He's got nothing now." I took a slow sip of my coffee, hiding my smile behind the cup. I didn't need to say anything. Margaret's tone told me she was as disgusted with her son's behavior as I was. "He made his bed," she added, shaking her head. "Now he has to lie in it." As I watched Margaret leave the cafe, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I hadn't wished ill on Robert. I'd been too busy focusing on my own recovery to think much about him at all. But knowing that karma had dealt him such a perfect hand of justice? Well, I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good. I was sorting through some old photos in my mother's living room when I heard aggressive pounding on the front door. Before I could even get up, the door burst open, and there stood Robert, his face red with anger and something else, desperation. "You lied to me," he shouted, storming into the house like he still had a right to be there. "My mother told me everything. You're completely fine." I stood up slowly, keeping the coffee table between us. "Get out of my house, Robert." "Your house?" He laughed bitterly. "The house your mother conveniently left you after our divorce? Along with all that money?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing but now saw as theatrical. "Ashley, baby, I made a mistake. I was scared and stupid. I still love you. We can start over." "Love me?" I felt a cold anger rising in my chest. "You're a traitor, Robert. You abandoned me when I was sick. You cheated on me. I want nothing to do with you. Why didn't you tell me you were getting better?" he demanded. "Why didn't you tell me about your mother's plans to leave you all this?" His voice cracked with what he probably thought was emotion, but I recognized as greed. "You want to know why?" I stepped closer to him. "The day I found out my tumor was benign, the day I rushed home to tell you the good news, was the same day I heard you on the phone with your mistress, talking about what a burden I was." He had the decency to flinch at that, but recovered quickly. "That's not fair, Ashley. You deliberately hid your mother's inheritance from me during the divorce. Half of all this belongs to me by law." "No, it doesn't," I said firmly. "Mom left me this inheritance after our divorce was final. You have no claim to it." "Bullshit." He was shouting now, his face getting redder. "You knew this was coming. You and your mother planned this. You hid assets during our divorce proceedings. That's illegal. I'll sue you, Ashley. I'll take you to court and prove that you deliberately concealed future assets during our divorce. You'll have to give me half of everything." I stood in my mother's living room, watching Robert's tirade with a calmness that seemed to infuriate him even more. When he finally paused for breath, I walked to my desk, pulled out my phone, and pulled up the photos I'd saved months ago. "Before you continue threatening me," I said quietly, "I think you should see something." I held up my phone, showing him the screenshots of his conversations with Amanda Wilson, his boss's wife. The color drained from his face. "You remember Amanda, don't you? Your boss John's wife?" I scrolled through the messages slowly, letting him see every damning detail. I wonder what John would think about these messages. About the photos. About all those lunch breaks you spent with his wife while claiming to work overtime. "You wouldn't," he whispered, but his voice had lost all its previous bravado. "I'm trying to recover from a serious illness, Robert. I don't need this stress. I don't need your threats. I don't need you bursting into my house making demands." I locked my phone and set it down. "Leave me alone, or John gets copies of everything. Your choice." He stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, he backed toward the door. "You've changed," he said accusingly. "No, Robert. I just stopped being afraid." After he left, I sat down and cried, not from sadness or fear, but from relief. It was truly over. The next few months were transformative. I sold my mother's house for an excellent price, thanks to the hot real estate market. With that money and the inheritance, I bought a beautiful apartment in a luxury building just 3 blocks from my office. The walk to work became my daily therapy, helping me rebuild my strength step by step. The illness had taken its toll on my body. I'd lost nearly 20 pounds during the worst of it. But slowly, I began to recover. I started taking yoga classes in my building's fitness center, gradually rebuilding my strength and flexibility. My appetite returned, and with it, my energy. My boss proved to be more understanding than I could have hoped for. "Take all the time you need," she told me during my first week back. "We're just glad to have you back with us." She arranged for me to work flexible hours, allowing me to attend my follow-up appointments and therapy sessions without stress. Sometimes, on my morning walks to work, I'd catch my reflection in the sleek glass buildings and barely recognize myself. Not because of the weight loss or the small scar hidden beneath my hair, but because of the confidence in my stride, the straightness of my spine, the lift of my chin. I was no longer the woman who had been afraid of being alone, of being sick, of being unloved. Through mutual acquaintances, I occasionally heard bits of news about Robert. He was still living with his mother, having blown through his divorce settlement with Sarah. Apparently, he'd had to leave his job at TradeWorks, though whether he quit or was fired, I never asked. It didn't matter anymore. My mother thrived at Sunset Gardens, making new friends and taking up watercolor painting. I visited her every Sunday, and we'd sit in the garden, drinking tea and talking about everything and nothing. She never said "I told you so" about Robert, never reminded me that she'd had doubts about him from the start. Instead, she would smile at me with pride and say, "You're blooming, sweetheart." She was right. Like the potted orchid on my new apartment's windowsill, a housewarming gift from my team at work, I was blooming. The tumor, the betrayal, the divorce, they hadn't destroyed me. They had forced me to grow stronger roots. My name is Sophia, and my childhood was filled with the kind of privilege most people only dream about. Our house was something straight out of a magazine: spacious rooms, manicured lawn, and a pool that hosted countless summer parties. My father's business success made it all possible, and he never let us forget it. "Sophia, honey, remember that everything we have comes from hard work," my dad would say, his voice carrying that familiar mix of pride and authority. I'd nod, trying to absorb the lesson, even though at that age, I was more interested in playing with my cousin Chloe than understanding the value of money. Ah, Chloe. She was practically my sister, even though technically she was my cousin. Just a year younger than me, she was the daughter of my father's younger brother, Uncle Mark. Our families were inseparable, though the contrast in our living situations was hard to miss. "Your uncle's family needs our support," my mom would explain whenever I noticed Dad helping them out financially. "Family takes care of family." She was always the diplomatic one, smoothing over any awkward moments when Uncle Mark would accept another check from Dad. Chloe and I shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams. We'd spend hours in my room, planning our futures. "We'll go to college together," Chloe would say, lying on my bed and staring at the ceiling. "And then we'll live in apartments next to each other, and our kids will be best friends too." When high school graduation approached, true to form, my father announced he'd pay for both our college educations. Mom stood beside him, beaming with pride as he made the announcement at our joint graduation party. "Both my girls deserve the best education possible," he declared, putting an arm around each of us. I remember how Chloe's eyes welled up with tears of gratitude, while I just smiled, taking it for granted. Looking back now, I should have noticed the signs. But back then, I was just happy to have my cousin/sister by my side as we packed our bags for college. We were going to take on the world together, 2 peas in a pod, never imagining that a wedding gift would eventually unravel everything we thought we knew about our perfect family. "This is going to be amazing," Chloe squealed as we decorated our dorm rooms, located conveniently across the hall from each other. "Nothing can ever come between us, right, Sophia?" Nothing, I promised, meaning it with all my heart. God, how naive we were. How naive I was. But that's the thing about perfect families, sometimes they're perfect only because we choose not to look too closely at the cracks in the foundation. College flew by faster than I expected. Before I knew it, I was walking across the stage to receive my diploma, my family cheering from the audience. I felt on top of the world, armed with my degree. I quickly landed a job at a marketing firm. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Well, almost everything. Dad, I've been thinking about getting my own place, I brought up one evening over dinner. I'd been browsing apartment listings online, dreaming of having my own space. The rental market is crazy right now, and with a down payment. Sophia, he cut me off, putting down his fork. You're an independent woman now. You have a good job. It's time for you to earn your own living. Your mother and I gave you a great education, but now it's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. Mom just sat there, nodding in agreement. I felt like I'd been slapped. So that's how I ended up in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment, watching my savings grow at a painfully slow rate while half my paycheck went to rent. But I was determined to prove I could do it on my own. A year later, Chloe graduated. We celebrated at her favorite restaurant, and that's when she dropped her bombshell. Jake proposed, she squealed, flashing a diamond ring. We're getting married in 4 months. 4 months flew by in a whirlwind of wedding preparations. I threw myself into my maid of honor duties, helping Chloe pick out everything from her dress to the table settings. Despite my own housing struggles, I was genuinely happy for her. The wedding day arrived, and everything was perfect. The ceremony was beautiful, the reception elegant. I watched Chloe dance with Jake, both of them glowing with happiness. Then my father stood up to make his speech. Chloe, he began, his voice thick with emotion. You've been like a daughter to me all these years. Watching you grow up alongside Sophia has been one of life's greatest joys. I smiled, sipping my champagne. Standard wedding speech stuff. But then... That's why, he continued, pulling out an envelope, I want to give you something special. Something to start your new life together. He paused for dramatic effect. The keys to your very own apartment. The glass nearly slipped from my hand. The room erupted in gasps and applause. Uncle Mark and Aunt Sarah were crying. Chloe rushed to hug my father, sobbing thank yous into his shoulder. You deserve this, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I love you like my own daughter. I sat there, frozen, as relatives crowded around Chloe and Jake, congratulating them on their incredible gift. My mind was spinning. The same father who told me to stand on my own 2 feet had just handed my cousin an apartment. I gripped my champagne glass so hard I thought it might shatter. But I kept smiling. Kept playing my part. This was Chloe's day, after all. I wouldn't make a scene. I waited exactly 3 days after the wedding before I showed up at my parents' house. My hands were shaking as I rang the doorbell, but my voice was steady when Dad opened the door. We need to talk, I said, walking past him into the familiar living room where I'd spent so many happy moments. What's on your mind, Sophia? He settled into his favorite armchair, looking perfectly calm, as if he hadn't just dropped a bomb on my life. Really? You're going to pretend you don't know? I stayed standing, too agitated to sit. You told me to earn my own living, to stand on my own feet. But you just handed Chloe an apartment like it was nothing. Want to explain that? Dad sighed, like I was being unreasonable. It's different with Chloe. She doesn't have the same opportunities you do. Different how? We went to the same college, got the same education, which you paid for, by the way. She comes from a poor family, Sophia. Jake's family isn't well off either. Your uncle can't afford to help them get started in life. He leaned forward. At today's prices, they'd never be able to save enough for their own place. I let out a sharp laugh. Oh, and I can? Half the country rents, Dad. They could have done what I'm doing, work, save, rent an apartment like normal people. "You're being mercantile," he snapped, his calm facade cracking. "This isn't about you. This is my money, and I decide how to spend it. I help your uncle's family because they need it." "Mercantile?" My voice rose. "This isn't about money, it's about fairness. How do you think it feels to watch you treat your niece better than your own daughter?" "That's enough." Mom burst into the room. I hadn't even realized she was home. "How dare you question your father's decisions? You have no right to tell him how to spend his money." "Oh, so you're okay with this?" I turned to her. "Your husband giving another woman's daughter an apartment while telling his own to struggle? Don't you take that tone with me, young lady." Mom's face was red with anger. "Your father has provided everything for you, and this is how you repay him? With jealousy and demands?" "Jealousy?" I was practically shouting now. "You think this is about jealousy? This is about respect. About treating your own child with the same consideration you show to others. Get out." Dad's voice was cold. "Until you can appreciate everything we've done for you, and apologize for this behavior, get out of my house." Gladly, I grabbed my purse. "And don't worry about doing anything else for me. I wouldn't want your charity." My eyes were burning with angry tears as I got into my car. It wasn't about the money, it never had been. It was about the double standard, about watching my father bend over backward for Chloe while telling me to toughen up. 5 years can change a lot of things. In my case, they changed almost everything. I built my career, rising through the ranks at my marketing firm to become a senior account manager. I saved money diligently, though nowhere near enough for a down payment in this insane market, and most importantly, I found Michael. He walked into my life during a client meeting. He was the creative director we were partnering with, and something just clicked. The moment he proposed, on a random Tuesday evening while we were cooking dinner together, I knew I'd finally found someone who truly put me first. The wedding planning started immediately. Our date was set for early summer, and I threw myself into it with the same determination I brought to everything else in my life. The venue was booked, the dress was chosen, and then came the hardest part, the guest list. I spent hours at my kitchen table, staring at names and relationships, though it wasn't hard to decide who wouldn't be on it. I hadn't spoken to my parents or Chloe in 5 years, not since Chloe's nasty message on Facebook. "You're just jealous, because I have a husband and an apartment while you have neither. Grow up, Sophia. Maybe if you weren't so entitled, you'd have both by now. But I guess some people just can't handle seeing others succeed." I'd blocked her after that. It was easier that way, cleaner. I built a new life, surrounded myself with people who valued me, and tried to forget about the family that had made me feel like a second-class daughter. But word travels fast in families, even broken ones. I was sitting in my apartment, reviewing floral arrangements and debating between roses and peonies, when my phone rang. Dad's name flashed on the screen, the first time in 5 years. My heart jumped into my throat, and my hand shook as I answered. "Sophia," his voice sounded older somehow, more tired. "I hear congratulations are in order." "Who told you?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Does it matter? Why didn't you invite me to your wedding?" He paused, and I could hear the hurt in his voice. "I'm your father. I should be the one walking you down the aisle." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Really? Now you want to play the father card?" "Sophia. Actually, I'm curious," I cut him off, feeling reckless. Something about hearing his voice had unleashed all the emotions I'd kept carefully contained for 5 years. "Will you be giving me an apartment as a wedding gift? You know, like you did for Chloe?" The silence on the other end stretched out so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Look, sweetheart, business hasn't been great lately. I can give you $5,000 for the wedding. That's a generous gift. You should be grateful." $5,000. After giving Chloe a whole apartment. I felt that old familiar burn of indignation rising in my throat. Some things, it seemed, never changed. Thanks for your generosity, Dad, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. But keep your money, I don't need it. The line went dead before he could respond. I stared at my phone, my hands trembling slightly, wondering if that 5-year silence had been better than this reminder of why I'd cut contact in the first place. The notification popped up on my phone the next morning. Robert Anderson has shared a post. My father rarely posted on social media, so seeing his name alone made my stomach clench. When I opened it, my hands started shaking. I never thought I'd have to write something like this about my own daughter, the post began. But Sophia has shown her true colors. She's demanding an apartment as a wedding gift, threatening not to invite me to her wedding unless I comply. The selfishness and mercenary attitude she's displaying breaks my heart. What happened to the daughter I raised? The comments started rolling in immediately. Aunt Linda, how ungrateful can she be? Cousin James, some people never appreciate what they have. Even people I barely knew were weighing in, you can't demand gifts like that. What kind of daughter blackmails her own father? My fingers flew across the keyboard before I could stop myself. A matter of principle? You gave my cousin an apartment for her wedding. Your own daughter deserves the same consideration, or at least an explanation for the difference in treatment. But the comments kept coming, each one more judgmental than the last. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type, but something had snapped inside me. I opened a new post and started writing. Let me tell you all a story that's been bothering me for years, I began. It's about a father who has always treated his niece better than his own daughter. Let me list the ways. Every birthday, Chloe got lavish parties while mine were simple family gatherings. When we went on family trips abroad, Dad always took Chloe shopping separately, buying her extras I never got. Her pocket money was consistently double mine. Dad paid for her education, which I appreciate he did for both of us. He gave her an apartment as a wedding gift, while telling me to stand on my own feet. At Chloe's wedding, she had her first dance with my father instead of her own. And you know what? The more I think about it, the more suspicious this whole situation seems. I wouldn't even be surprised if it turned out Chloe was actually my father's daughter. I hit post before I could second guess myself. The words stared back at me from the screen. A nuclear bomb dropped into the middle of our family's carefully maintained facade. There would be no taking it back now. The aftermath of my post was nuclear. Within hours, my phone was blowing up with calls and messages from every corner of the family. Some relatives immediately announced they wouldn't be attending my wedding. Mom called first, her voice shrill with anger. How could you? Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? Your father is devastated. We raised you better than this. Dad's call came next, a stream of rage and accusations about how I was destroying the family name. You're dead to me, he spat before hanging up. Aunt Sarah's call was particularly venomous. You vindictive little bitch, she hissed. How dare you suggest? You're just jealous of my daughter's happiness. Then came Chloe's message. Congratulations on proving what a hysterical, paranoid person you've become. I feel sorry for your fiancé. He's marrying a delusional woman who invents 6 stories about her own family because she can't handle not being the center of attention. Don't worry about blocking me, I'll do it myself. I quietly blocked everyone who'd left nasty comments or messages. My wedding guest list got significantly shorter, but I told myself it was for the best. Only Uncle Mark remained silent throughout the whole ordeal, which I found oddly comforting amid the chaos. The next 2 months were a blur of wedding preparations. Michael was my rock through it all, never questioning my decision to cut off my family, supporting me as I revised seating charts and canceled place settings. Then, one rainy evening, there was a knock at my door. Uncle Mark stood there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Can I come in? He asked quietly. We need to talk. I'd never seen my uncle look so broken. He sat heavily on my couch, hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles were white. Your post, he began, about your father's treatment of Chloe, it made me start thinking. Really thinking about everything. And remembering. He told me about the early years of his marriage, how my father was always around their house. He'd drive Sarah home from work, saying it wasn't safe for her to take the bus. This was even before she was pregnant with Chloe. He was always bringing her gifts, expensive ones. I thought, God, I was such a fool. I thought he was just being a generous brother. Uncle Mark's voice cracked. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope with trembling hands. I had to know. After your post, I just had to know. The DNA test results were printed on official laboratory letterhead. My uncle had collected hair samples from all three of them, himself, Chloe, and my father. The results were unequivocal. Uncle Mark's genetic match to Chloe showed only an uncle's relationship, 84%, while my father showed a 99.99% paternal match. Sarah confessed everything today, he whispered. 25 years. They'd been having an affair for 25 years. Since before Chloe was even conceived. We sat there until well past midnight, piecing together memories that suddenly made horrifying sense. The special treatment, the excessive gifts, the way my father always seemed to know about Chloe's life before anyone else. All those times he'd insisted on driving Aunt Sarah to doctor's appointments when she was pregnant. I'm so sorry, Sophia, Uncle Mark said as he was leaving. I should have seen it. Should have known. I watched him walk to his car in the rain, his shoulders hunched with the weight of 2 decades of betrayal. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt no satisfaction in being right. The morning after Uncle Mark's visit changed everything. I was still processing our conversation when my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Sophia, your uncle just left. We need to talk. Can you meet me at Rosemary's Cafe in an hour? I found her already there, sitting in a corner booth, looking like she hadn't slept. Her hands were wrapped around an untouched cup of coffee, and I noticed they were shaking slightly. I filed for divorce, she said before I could even sit down. I just came from the lawyer's office. Her voice cracked. 25 years of marriage, and I never knew. Never wanted to know, maybe. Uncle Mark had told her everything, the DNA test results, Aunt Sarah's confession, the decades-long affair. He'd filed for divorce too, unable to stay married to a woman who'd lived such a profound lie. Sophia, Mom reached across the table and grabbed my hands. Her eyes were brimming with tears. I owe you the biggest apology. All these years, I defended him. I sided with him. I watched him favor Chloe and told myself it was nothing. I should have listened to you. Should have seen what was happening in my own home. Mom. No, let me finish. When you posted about your suspicions, I was so angry. I thought you were trying to hurt us, trying to get revenge. But you were the only one brave enough to say what we all should have seen. We spent hours in that cafe, crying, talking, beginning the slow process of healing. Mom ordered a bottle of wine, and we shared it as she told me about all the signs she'd ignored over the years, all the moments that suddenly made terrible sense. Later that evening, I was at home trying to process everything that had happened when someone started pounding on my door. I opened it to find Dad standing there, his face purple with rage. Are you happy now? He shouted, pushing past me into my apartment. You've destroyed everything. 2 families, destroyed because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. I destroyed nothing, I replied, surprised by how steady my voice was. You did this. 25 years ago, you made a choice that would destroy these families. I just exposed the truth. His face twisted. Well, I won't be at your wedding. How's that for truth? I wasn't planning to invite you, I said quietly. You haven't been a real father to me in years. Then it's settled, he snarled. You're no longer my daughter. A strange calm settled over me. That's fine, I smiled. You have another daughter anyway, don't you? The look of shock on his face was almost comical. Before he could respond, I opened the door and gestured for him to leave. When he did, I closed it firmly behind him, leaving him standing in the hallway. That evening, I called Uncle Mark. My hands were trembling slightly as I dialed his number. "Uncle Mark, I have something to ask you." I took a deep breath. "Would you walk me down the aisle at my wedding?" There was a long pause, and I heard him clear his throat several times before he could speak. "Sophia, I would be honored." 2 months passed in a blur of wedding preparations. The guest list was shorter than originally planned, but somehow that made it more special. Every person who attended had chosen truth over comfortable lies, had stood by me when it would have been easier to look the other way. The garden venue was beautiful, scattered with white roses and peonies. Mom sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. When Uncle Mark took my arm to walk me down the aisle, I saw tears in his eyes too. The divorce proceedings between my parents moved surprisingly quickly. Mom told me later that Dad agreed to everything just to get it over with, perhaps hoping to minimize the scandal. They settled out of court, and Mom received a $200,000 settlement. I was in my rented apartment, surrounded by wedding thank you cards I was writing, when Mom came to visit one afternoon. "I want you to have this," she said, sliding an envelope across my coffee table. Inside was a check for the full settlement amount. "I don't need this money. What I need is for my daughter to have the home she deserves." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "Consider it compensation for all the years I failed to stand up for you." "You didn't fail." "I did, but we're fixing things now." She smiled. "Besides, what better way to use his money than to finally give you what he should have given you years ago?" I won't pretend I didn't cry when I deposited that check. Or when Michael and I found the perfect apartment, a beautiful 3-bedroom with a balcony and enough space to start the family we're hoping for. Every time I unlock our front door, I feel a sense of justice being served. Dad and Aunt Sarah got married last month. I heard about it through the family grapevine. Apparently, they didn't even wait for the ink to dry on their respective divorce papers. They're not hiding their relationship anymore. Their social media is full of happy couples photos, as if the past 25 years of deception never happened. I don't follow their accounts. I don't need to. Most of our relatives sided with Mom and me once the DNA results became public knowledge. Even those who initially defended Dad couldn't ignore the evidence. Uncle Mark comes over for dinner every Sunday now. He's dating again, tentatively stepping back into life after the betrayal. Mom joins us often, and watching them heal together, sister-in-law and brother-in-law bonded by shared pain, has been beautiful. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Chloe. About the fact that she's technically my half-sister. I wonder if she knew, if she ever suspected the truth behind our father's favoritism. But those thoughts don't keep me awake anymore. I have my own life now, my own home, my own family, built on honesty instead of secrets. I sit here staring at my phone, reading yet another guilt-tripping message from my mother about how I should give my half-sister one of my apartments. The audacity of her request doesn't surprise me anymore. No matter how many times I block her number, she finds new ways to reach me. Text messages, emails, even comments on social media, all demanding the same thing. To understand why I'm so adamant in my refusal, we need to go back 20 years. I was 6 when my world fell apart. Mom sat me down one evening in our living room, her face oddly calm as she twisted her wedding ring, and told me she'd fallen in love with someone else. Dad was moving out. I remember watching him pack his things, while Mom hovered impatiently by the door, checking her watch every few minutes. Mom didn't waste any time. The ink was barely dry on the divorce papers when she married Steve, and he moved into our house. Everything changed overnight. My princess drawings disappeared from the fridge, replaced by Steve's work schedule. My favorite cereal vanished from the pantry because Steve preferred healthy breakfast options. It was like someone had taken my home and rearranged everything just slightly wrong. Dad sent regular alimony checks and tried to see me when he could, but his business kept him busy. Our visits grew shorter and less frequent, always interrupted by urgent phone calls about meetings and deals. Then, when I was 8, my half-sister arrived. I still remember standing in the hospital hallway, watching through the glass as Mom cradled her new baby, with Steve beaming beside them. That was the moment I became invisible in my own home. They named her Lisa, and suddenly, everything revolved around her schedule, her needs, her wants. "Rachel, keep it down," became Mom's favorite phrase. "The baby's sleeping." "Rachel, go to your room," Steve would say. "Your mother needs to focus on the baby." "Rachel, we can't help with your homework right now. Lisa has a fever." "Rachel, eat dinner in your room tonight. Lisa's fussy and needs quiet." I grew up with a roof over my head and food on my plate, but love and warmth were luxuries I didn't get to experience. My bedroom became my sanctuary and my prison. I'd spend hours there, doing homework, reading books, or just staring at the ceiling, trying to make myself as small and quiet as possible. Steve made no secret of his dislike for me. He'd sigh heavily whenever I entered a room, or mutter under his breath about baggage from the past. Late at night, I'd hear them talking through the thin walls of my bedroom, their voices carrying clearly in the quiet house. "She should be living with her father," Steve would say. "She doesn't belong here. Look how she mopes around the house. She's making Lisa uncomfortable." "We can't send her away," Mom would reply in a harsh whisper. "Mark's alimony is too important. We need that money. Have you seen how much Lisa's dance classes cost? Besides, the mortgage." Those whispered conversations taught me everything I needed to know about my place in this family. I wasn't a daughter, I was a paycheck. A means to an end. A necessary inconvenience they tolerated for the monthly deposits my father made into their account. Every time I heard them talk like that, a little piece of my heart would harden, building up walls that would eventually become impenetrable. As I grew older, the distance between me and my mother's family grew into a canyon. Every summer vacation became a stark reminder of where I stood in their hierarchy. While they packed their bags for beach resorts and theme parks, I'd be shuttled off to Dad's place like an afterthought. "We just can't afford an extra ticket, Rachel," Mom would say, not quite meeting my eyes. "But you'll have fun with your father, won't you?" The truth was, I did have fun with Dad, even though our time together was punctuated by business calls and urgent meetings. He'd sit with me during breakfast, his phone constantly buzzing, looking at me with guilty eyes. "I'm sorry, Princess," he'd say for the 100th time. "The business is really taking off, and I need to be available. But look what I got you." And out would come the latest iPhone, or a new laptop, or the newest gaming console. I remember the day he gave me my first MacBook. His eyes lit up watching me open it. "This is for all those weekends I had to cancel," he said. "I know it doesn't make up for it, but..." "It's perfect, Dad," I told him, and I meant it. Not because of the expensive gift, but because of how his face brightened when I hugged him. But my happiness would always be short-lived. The moment I returned home with any new gadget, the storm would begin. "A MacBook?" Lisa would screech, her face turning red. "That's not fair. I want one too." She'd stomp her feet, tears streaming down her face, even though she was 8 years younger and barely knew how to use a computer. "Look what you've started," Mom would hiss at me, while Steve stood in the corner, arms crossed, glaring as if I'd committed a crime. The pattern was always the same. Lisa would throw a tantrum, Mom and Steve would pace around anxiously, and within a week, they'd cave and buy her the same thing. It didn't matter if she was too young for it or didn't need it, she had to have exactly what I had. One particularly bad episode involved an iPad Pro. Lisa's meltdown lasted 3 days straight. "I hate you," she screamed at me. "You always get better stuff. It's not fair." Mom finally snapped. I overheard her angry phone call to Dad that evening. "Mark, this has to stop," she demanded. "These expensive gifts are causing problems in my household. Lisa gets upset, and we can't afford to keep matching your presents. Either buy something for both girls or don't buy anything at all." The next weekend, Dad picked me up looking more serious than usual. We drove to our favorite diner, and over chocolate milkshakes, he broke the news. "Rachel, honey," he started, "your mom called me about the gifts." My heart sank. I'm sorry, Dad. I don't mean to cause trouble. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. No, you haven't done anything wrong. But I think we need to be smarter about this. I won't be giving you any more expensive gadgets. I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment, but then he smiled. Instead, he continued, lowering his voice, I've opened a college fund for you. By the time you graduate high school, you'll be able to go to any university you want. My eyes widened. Really? Really? But this has to be our secret, okay? Don't tell your mom or anyone else. This is just between us. I nodded eagerly, feeling for the first time like I had something truly mine, a future that nobody could take away or demand to share. The day I graduated high school should have been filled with celebration. Instead, just a week later, I found myself sitting at our dining table, pushing food around my plate while Mom cleared her throat. Rachel, she said, setting down her fork. Now that you've graduated, we need to discuss something important. I already knew what was coming. The way she'd been eyeing my room lately, the whispered conversations with Steve, it wasn't hard to guess. Lisa needs her own space now that she's 10, Mom continued. She's growing up, and your room would be perfect for her. It's time for you to move out. Steve nodded vigorously beside her, while Lisa bounced in her chair with excitement. I kept my face neutral, took a sip of water, and said, actually, I was planning to leave anyway. I'm going to college in the fall. Mom's eyebrows shot up. College? We can't afford that, Rachel. You know our financial situation. Dad's paying for it, I replied, watching their faces transform. The relief that washed over them was almost comical. Steve's shoulders relaxed, and Mom's tight smile loosened. Oh, she said. Well, that's good then. I spent the next day packing my life into boxes. The walls of my room, already bare from years of not being allowed to put up posters, it'll damage the paint, Rachel, seemed to close in on me. Through the thin walls, I could hear Mom and Steve talking in their bedroom. Finally, Steve was saying, his voice gleeful. No more dealing with Mark's daughter. And the alimony payments will stop too. I know, Mom replied. I was worried we'd have to keep her around longer. This worked out perfectly. Their words should have hurt, but I felt nothing but relief. 2 days later, I loaded the last box into Dad's car. Dad had taken a whole week off work, the first vacation he'd had in years, and surprised me with tickets to Hawaii. As our plane took off, I watched my hometown disappear beneath the clouds, feeling lighter with each mile we put between us and that house. I thought we could use some father-daughter time before college starts, he said, squeezing my hand. For the first time in years, his phone stayed off. We spent our days on the beach, trying to surf, badly, eating at local restaurants, and talking, really talking, about everything and nothing. In the evenings, we'd sit on our hotel balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors I'd never seen back home. One night, as we watched the waves crash against the shore, Dad turned to me. I'm sorry it took me so long to do this, he said quietly. I leaned my head against his shoulder, breathing in the salt air and the faint scent of his aftershave. You're here now, I replied. That's what matters. College felt like breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. I moved into my dorm room that fall, armed with determination and the knowledge that Dad had my back. But I wanted to stand on my own feet too, so I got a job at the campus cafe, the daily grind. Rachel, you don't have to work, Dad insisted during one of our calls. I can send you a monthly allowance. I know, Dad, but I want to, I replied, balancing my phone while wiping down tables. It feels good earning my own money. Between classes, study sessions, and work shifts, I built a life that was entirely my own. My coworkers became friends, my professors became mentors, and slowly, the weight of my past began to lift. I loved the rhythm of my new life, early morning study sessions before my first class, afternoon shifts at the cafe, and late nights in the library with my study group. Dad's business was booming, and he bought a beautiful house in a quiet suburb. During holidays, I'd stay with him, marveling at how peaceful life could be. We'd spend evenings in his home theater or by the pool, and he'd tell me about his plans for the company's expansion. "I have something special planned for when you graduate," he'd say with a mysterious smile. "Dad, paying for my college is already more than enough," I'd protest, but he'd just shake his head and change the subject. Every time I visited, the house felt more like home. I had my own room there, decorated exactly how I wanted it, something I'd never been allowed in my mother's house. Dad even gave me a key, telling me I could come anytime, even when he was away on business trips. Meanwhile, my mother's world continued spinning without me in it. Her social media was a shrine to Lisa, dance recitals, school events, family vacations. Sometimes, relatives would comment on her posts. "How's Rachel doing? Haven't seen her in ages." Mom's replies were always the same: "Oh, she's doing well, living her adult life." As if I was some distant acquaintance she'd lost touch with, not her firstborn daughter. She had no idea I was making Dean's List every semester. Didn't know I'd been promoted to shift supervisor at the cafe. Couldn't tell you what I was majoring in or who my friends were. My life had become a fill-in-the-blank space in her story, and she seemed perfectly content to leave it empty. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of the opportunity Dad had given me. Between classes and work, I joined the business club and even started tutoring younger students in economics. My professors started talking about graduate school possibilities, and for the first time, I could see a clear path forward for my life. One day, scrolling through my feed, I saw a photo of Lisa's 12th birthday party. The house was decorated with balloons and streamers, and Mom had tagged every relative except me. "Our little princess is growing up so fast," the caption read, followed by a dozen heart emojis. I stared at the image for a long moment, then closed the app. That night, as I locked up the cafe, I realized I didn't feel the ache I expected. Instead, I felt light, unburdened, like I'd finally put down a heavy bag I'd been carrying for years. Graduation day was bright and sunny. I spotted Dad in the crowd immediately. He was the one cheering the loudest when they called my name. After the ceremony, while families took photos and celebrated, he pulled me aside with a mysterious smile. "Close your eyes and hold out your hands," he said. I felt something metal drop into my palm. Opening my eyes, I saw a set of keys with a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked, opening the envelope to find an address. "Your graduation present. An apartment in your name, back in hometown. Fully furnished and ready for you to move in." I burst into tears, throwing my arms around him. "Dad, this is too much." "Nothing's too much for my little girl," he said, hugging me tight. The apartment was perfect, modern, spacious, in a quiet neighborhood. I found a job at a local marketing firm, settled into a comfortable routine, and rarely thought about my mother's family anymore. Life was good, simple, peaceful. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "The tests came back positive," Dad said, his voice unusually quiet. "It's stage 3 pancreatic cancer." The next 2 years became a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and desperate searches for experimental treatments. I watched my strong, vibrant father grow weaker day by day. He fought hard, we both did, but cancer doesn't fight fair. On a rainy Tuesday morning, holding my hand, he took his last breath. He was just 54. I handled the funeral arrangements in a daze. Posted about it on social media, tagging Mom out of obligation more than hope. Her response came hours later. "Sorry, but I'm too busy to attend my ex-husband's funeral. Lisa has a dance recital that day." Even in my grief, I couldn't say I was surprised. The reading of the will left me speechless. Dad had left me everything: his company, the house, several investment properties. His lawyer handed me a letter. "Dear Rachel, I built all this for you, princess. I'm sorry I can't be there to see what you'll do with it, but I know it'll be something amazing. Take care of yourself first, then others if you can. Love, Dad." I hired Marcus Chen, Dad's trusted VP, to run the company as CEO. He had the experience I lacked, and I knew Dad would approve. Meanwhile, I found my own way to honor his memory, establishing a foundation to help cancer patients and their families. The day we launched the foundation, I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. "No one should fight cancer alone," I said, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. "And thanks to the Mark Anderson Memorial Foundation, no one will have to." That night, alone in my apartment, I looked at Dad's photo on my desk. "I hope I'm making you proud," I whispered. The company was thriving, the foundation was helping people, and somehow, through all the grief, I was still standing. Maybe that's what he'd been preparing me for all along. My phone rang on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The name on the screen made my heart skip. Mom. After 9 years of silence, she was calling me. "Rachel, can you come over? It's important." Her voice sounded different, strained, older. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Walking up to my old house felt surreal. Mom opened the door, and I barely recognized her. She'd aged dramatically, her face lined with pain. Steve hovered behind her, and there was Lisa, now 19, watching me with curious eyes. In the living room, nothing had changed, same furniture, same photos of Lisa everywhere. Mom lowered herself carefully into her chair, wincing. "I need surgery," she said without preamble. "Several surgeries, actually. My joints are deteriorating. Without treatment, I could end up immobile." She paused, wringing her hands. "I heard about your inheritance from Mark. About the company, the properties." There it was, the real reason for the reunion. "We can't afford the surgeries," Steve added, his pride clearly battling with desperation. "The insurance won't cover enough." I studied my mother's face, the same face that had dismissed me, forgotten me, ignored me for years. The same woman who couldn't even attend my father's funeral. But underneath all that history, she was still my mother. "I'll cover the medical bills," I heard myself say. Mom burst into tears, pulling me into an awkward hug, our first in years. "Stay for dinner," she insisted. "We have so much catching up to do." Dinner was a strange affair. Between bites, Mom and Steve peppered me with questions. "So, how many properties did Mark leave you exactly? Is the company doing well? Are you selling any of the assets?" I deflected each question with practiced ease. "The estate is quite complicated, I'd say, where everything's in trusts and legal arrangements." Lisa watched this dance with sharp eyes, eerily similar to how I used to watch Mom and Steve's late-night conversations through the years. As I drove home that night, I wondered if I'd made the right decision. I had the means to help, and despite everything, some small part of me still hoped that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. The next day, I contacted the hospital to arrange payment for Mom's surgeries. Whatever happened next, at least I knew I'd done what Dad would have wanted, being better than the hurt I'd been given. The surgeries were successful. I paid each medical bill without question, and within months, Mom was walking normally again. That's when the invitations started coming. "Rachel, come for Sunday dinner." "Rachel, we're having a barbecue." "Rachel, Lisa misses you." Each visit felt like walking on eggshells. Mom would reminisce about my childhood, conveniently editing out the painful parts. Steve would ask casual questions about Dad's company. Lisa would watch me with a mixture of expectation and something else I couldn't quite identify. "We're finally a family again," Mom would say, reaching for my hand across the table. But I noticed how her eyes never quite met mine when she said it. When the invitation came for Lisa's 20th birthday party, I decided to make an effort. I bought her the latest iPhone, top model, all the bells and whistles. Maybe it was an attempt to bridge the gap between us, or maybe I just wanted to give her something I knew she'd like. The party was a small affair, just the four of us. No friends, no other relatives. Mom had insisted on keeping it intimate, though now I understood why. Lisa unwrapped the iPhone with barely concealed disappointment. "Oh, thanks," she said flatly, setting it aside without even opening the box. She kept glancing at Mom as if waiting for something. Then came dinner, and Mom cleared her throat in that way I remembered all too well from childhood, the sound that always preceded something unpleasant. "Rachel, sweetheart," she began, her voice honey-sweet. "The phone is lovely, but we were thinking you could give Lisa something more substantial." I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean?" "Well," Mom continued, sharing a look with Steve, "we know your father left you several properties. And Lisa's graduating from college soon. Wouldn't it be nice if she had her own place? You have so many apartments, surely you could spare one for your sister?" The room went silent. Steve stared intently at his plate while Lisa leaned forward, eyes bright with anticipation. This was clearly what they'd been building toward all along. I set down my fork carefully, trying to process what I was hearing. All those family dinners, the sudden interest in my life, the constant invitations, it had all been leading to this moment. "No," I said quietly. "I won't be giving away any of my properties." Mom's sweet expression faltered. "But Rachel, it's your sister. Surely your father would have wanted." "Don't," I cut her off. "Don't you dare tell me what my father would have wanted." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Mom's face turned red with anger, while Lisa slumped in her chair, crossing her arms. "How dare you be so selfish?" Mom snapped. "Your sister deserves—" "No," I said again, standing up. "What I deserve is to not be used for my money. Not now, not ever." Mom's sweet facade shattered instantly. Her face contorted with rage as she slammed her hands on the table, making the dishes rattle. "You ungrateful little bitch," she screamed. "After everything we've done for you. You're just like your father, selfish and heartless." Lisa shrank back in her chair while Steve stood up, looming over the table. But I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. "Everything you've done for me?" I shot back, standing my ground. "Like throwing me out at 18 the moment Dad's alimony check stopped coming? Like treating me like an unwanted houseguest in my own home? You were never part of this family," Mom shrieked. "You were always in the way, always causing problems. And now you have all this money and won't help your own sister?" She lunged forward, hand raised to strike me. I caught her wrist midair. "Touch me," I said quietly, "and I'll go straight to the police. And then I'll sue you for every penny I spent on your surgeries." The color drained from her face. Steve took a step back. Lisa's mouth hung open. "You wouldn't dare," Mom whispered. "Try me. I'm not that powerless little girl anymore." I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, turning back one last time. "Don't call me again. Don't message me. Don't try to contact me through relatives. We're done." That was more than a year ago. Now I sit in my office, looking out over the city as another one of Mom's messages pops up on my phone. They started coming a week after that dinner, first angry, then pleading, then tearfully apologetic. "Please, Rachel, we're family. Your sister misses you. We can work this out." I block each new number, each fake social media account they create. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if I'm being too harsh, if I should give them another chance. But then I remember Dad's words from his letter, "Take care of yourself first." So that's what I'm doing. The company is thriving under Marcus's leadership. The Cancer Foundation is helping dozens of families. My life is full of meaning and purpose, built on the foundation of love that Dad provided. Yesterday, I received an invitation to Lisa's graduation. Inside was a handwritten note from Mom, "Please come. We can start over." I dropped it in the shredder without a second thought. Some people say blood is thicker than water, but the family you choose, the bonds you forge through love and trust, those are the ones that truly matter. Growing up, I always knew I was the second choice. My name is Emma, and from my earliest memories, I watched my parents shower my older brother Michael with endless attention and opportunities while I stood in the shadows. The difference in how they treated us wasn't subtle, it was as clear as day. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, doing homework alone, while Mom and Dad drove Michael to his latest singing competition or club meeting. He was 3 years older than me, and somehow that made him more deserving of everything. Every time his teachers mentioned even the slightest talent, my parents jumped at the chance to nurture it, spending money we didn't really have on lessons and equipment. Michael has such a beautiful voice, Mom would gush to anyone who would listen. He's going to be something special one day. Meanwhile, I learned early on not to ask for much. When I showed interest in art classes, Mom just smiled apologetically. Maybe next semester, honey. Michael's voice lessons are taking up the budget right now. The disparity became even more apparent during Michael's senior year of high school. I was 15 at the time, sitting quietly at dinner when my parents made their big announcement. "We've been saving up," Dad said proudly, "and we're going to send Michael to Preston College. It's one of the most prestigious schools in the state." Michael's eyes lit up. "Really? That's amazing." "And that's not all," Mom added. "You can stay in our apartment near the campus. No rent, of course. We want you to focus on your studies." I pushed my peas around my plate, trying to hide my disappointment. Not that anyone was looking at me anyway. They were all focused on Michael's beaming face as he talked about his future plans. That night, lying in bed, I did the math. If they were spending this much on Michael's education and giving him a free apartment, there was no way they'd have anything left for my college fund. The realization hit me hard, but instead of crying, I started planning. The next day, I visited my grandparents' antique store. My grandfather listened as I explained my situation. "Well, Emma," he said, studying me carefully, "I could just give you the money for college." He paused, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "But I think it would be better if you earned it yourself. How would you like to work here after school?" So that's how it started. While Michael packed up for his prestigious college adventure, I began working at the antique store. Every afternoon after school, I'd help catalog items, assist customers, and learn the business from my grandfather. My grandmother would bring me snacks and tell me stories about the vintage pieces we sold. My parents' reaction to my initiative was telling. When I told them about my job and my plans to save for college, they seemed relieved, almost grateful that I'd solved my own problem. 3 years of working at my grandparents' antique store flew by. Every afternoon spent dusting old furniture and organizing vintage jewelry had paid off. I'd saved enough money for college. When I graduated high school, there wasn't much fanfare, just a quiet dinner at home. But I didn't mind, I was proud of what I'd accomplished on my own. I enrolled in the local state college, choosing a practical business program that wouldn't drain my savings. The tuition was reasonable, and I even had some money left over. Living at home and taking the bus to campus wasn't glamorous, but it made financial sense. "Mom, Dad," I broached the subject one evening, "I've been thinking about getting a used car. It would make getting to classes easier." Dad barely looked up from his phone. "Sorry, Emma. We just don't have the money for that right now." Mom chimed in, "The bus system is perfectly fine. Lots of students use it." I bit my tongue, remembering how they'd helped Michael get his license and even contributed to his first car. But that was ancient history now. My first year of college passed quickly, and just as I was finishing my spring finals, our house erupted with excitement. Michael was graduating from Preston College. Mom and Dad threw him an elaborate celebration, inviting what felt like half the town. Our house was packed with relatives, friends, and neighbors, all there to celebrate my brother's achievement. I was arranging appetizers in the kitchen when Michael made his grand entrance with a pretty blonde woman on his arm. Sarah, his college girlfriend. They were beaming as they walked into the room, hand in hand. "Everyone," Michael announced, commanding immediate attention, "Sarah and I have some exciting news. We're engaged." The room exploded with cheers and congratulations. Mom burst into tears of joy, and Dad clapped Michael on the back so hard I thought he might fall over. "But wait, there's more," Sarah added, her voice sweet as honey. "After the wedding, we'll be moving to Connecticut. My parents own a successful business there, and they want us to take it over." Mom's tears turned into full-on sobbing. My baby boy, a successful businessman. That's my son, Dad proclaimed proudly. Always knew you were destined for great things. I stood in the corner, watching the scene unfold. Nobody seemed to notice that I'd just finished my freshman year with a 4.0 GPA, or that I'd been working part-time at a local cafe while maintaining my studies. But I was used to it by now. The wedding preparations consumed the next year. While I focused on my studies, now in my third year, Mom and Dad threw themselves into planning the perfect wedding for their perfect son. They took out a substantial loan to cover everything: the venue, the catering, the flowers, the band. Nothing was too good for Michael and Sarah. The wedding itself was exactly what you'd expect: extravagant, emotional, and all about Michael. I stood in my bridesmaid dress, which I had to pay for myself, watching my parents beam with pride as they danced with the happy couple. They'd spared no expense, even though I knew they'd be paying off the loan for years to come. After Michael and Sarah left for Connecticut, I stood in my cramped bedroom at my parents' house, staring at my textbooks. An idea struck me: the apartment where Michael had lived during college was now empty. It was perfectly located near campus, and it would give me some much-needed independence. I approached my parents that evening while they were watching TV. Mom, Dad, since Michael's apartment is empty now, would it be okay if I moved in there? They exchanged glances before Mom spoke. Well, honey, you can move in, but you'll need to pay rent. The words hit me like a slap in the face. Rent? But Michael lived there for free. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his recliner. That was different. We have the wedding loan to pay off now. We need the extra income. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm your daughter too, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I've never asked you for anything. I worked for my college money. I take the bus everywhere. Mom held up her hand to stop me. She and Dad had one of their silent conversations, the kind they used to have when deciding whether to spend money on another of Michael's activities. Fine, Mom finally said. We'll charge you half the normal rent. I wanted to argue more, but I knew this was the best offer I'd get. Okay, I'll take it. That weekend, I moved into the apartment. It still had traces of Michael everywhere: holes in the walls from his college posters, water rings on the coffee table from his late-night study sessions. I took extra shifts at the cafe to cover the rent, often working until closing time. Between classes, studying, and work, I barely had time to sleep. My final year of college passed in a blur of textbooks, coffee shop aprons, and midnight study sessions. Before I knew it, graduation day arrived. While my classmates' families planned parties and celebrations, my parents opted for a quiet dinner at home. They only invited my grandparents, no extended family, no friends, no elaborate catering like Michael's graduation. We sat around the dining room table, eating the lasagna I'd made myself. Grandma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Emma, dear, we're so proud of you, she said warmly. Graduating with highest honors while working part-time, that's quite an achievement. Before I could respond, Mom's phone buzzed. Her face lit up as she read the message. Oh, speaking of achievements, she interrupted, Michael just texted. The business is doing wonderfully. He says they're expanding into 2 new locations. I watched as my graduation dinner turned into a celebration of Michael's success in Connecticut. My grandparents exchanged knowing looks, and Grandpa squeezed my shoulder supportively. My hard work in college paid off sooner than I expected. Within 2 weeks of graduation, I landed a position at Anderson & Mitchell, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. The starting salary was better than I dared hope for, and I was thrilled to finally be starting my career. That excitement lasted exactly 3 days, until my parents found out about my salary. Emma, Mom said during one of her unexpected visits to the apartment, now that you're making good money, you should start paying the full rent amount. I stared at her, wondering if I'd heard correctly. But we agreed on half. That was when you were a student, she replied matter-of-factly. You can afford it now. I wanted to point out that Michael had lived here for free even after getting a job, but I'd learned that comparing myself to my brother was pointless. The apartment's location was perfect, just a 10-minute walk from my office, so I reluctantly agreed. Life fell into a routine. I threw myself into my work, determined to prove my worth at the company. Every month, like clockwork, Mom would call. "Emma, dear, just reminding you about the rent. It's due on Friday. We're counting on that money." 3 years passed this way. I earned a significant promotion and raise, but I kept that information to myself. I'd learned my lesson: any hint of financial success would just lead to more demands from my parents. Through their occasional updates, I heard that Michael and Sarah had a baby boy. I'd seen pictures on social media, but hadn't visited. Our communication had dwindled to perfunctory birthday messages and holiday greetings. I was fine with that. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Emma?" Mom's voice was tight with tension. "We need to talk about your brother. There's been some trouble. The business, well, it's gone bankrupt. He had a terrible fight with Sarah's parents. They're furious about how he managed things. They're not speaking anymore." I closed my eyes, already knowing where this was heading. "He's coming back home," she continued. "With Sarah and the baby." "Oh," I said carefully. "I assume he'll be staying with you and Dad?" "Actually," Mom paused. "That apartment you're in is quite large. He'll be staying there." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "What? Mom, this is my home. I've been living here for years." "Don't be dramatic, Emma. Your brother needs help. He doesn't have any money right now, so he'll stay there for free. You can keep paying the rent." "That's absurd," I protested. "If he's moving in, maybe I should just find my own place." "Don't you dare." Mom's voice turned sharp. "We need your rent money now more than ever. Michael's going through a rough time. You wouldn't want to make things harder for him, would you?" I shook my head in disbelief and hung up without another word. The moving day was worse than I'd imagined. Michael, Sarah, and their crying baby Tommy showed up with a mountain of luggage and baby equipment. Mom arrived to supervise the transition, which apparently meant making my life as uncomfortable as possible. "Emma, clear out your room," Mom directed, hands on her hips. "Michael and Sarah need it for Tommy's nursery." I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, my personal space for the past 4 years. "What? Where am I supposed to sleep?" "The living room has a perfectly good couch," she replied, already starting to move my things. "You can't be serious. I pay rent here, full rent, and you're putting me on the couch." Mom's expression hardened. "Don't be selfish, Emma. Your brother has a baby. Babies need proper rooms." So I watched helplessly as my bedroom was transformed into a nursery, complete with a crib, changing table, and all the other baby paraphernalia. My belongings were unceremoniously piled in a corner of the living room, which was now my bedroom. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Michael moped around the apartment all day, alternating between complaining about his in-laws and reminiscing about his glory days as a successful businessman. Sarah spent her time either crying or arguing with Michael about whose turn it was to change Tommy's diaper. The baby seemed to sense the tension and cried constantly. I'd come home from a long day at work to find dishes piled in the sink, toys scattered everywhere, and dirty laundry spilling out of the hamper. The first few times, I tried ignoring the mess, but the dirty dishes attracted ants, and the clutter made it impossible to relax in what was now my bedroom. So I cleaned, I cooked, I did laundry. And every meal I prepared mysteriously disappeared before I could eat it. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day at work, I decided to extend an olive branch. "Michael," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral, "we actually have some openings at my company. I could put in a good word for you with HR. The benefits are great, and the starting salary is decent." Michael looked up from his phone, his face twisting with indignation. "An entry-level position? Are you kidding me? I'm a businessman, Emma, I don't do entry-level." I need an executive position, something worthy of my experience. Your experience running a business into the ground? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Michael's face turned red. You don't know anything about what happened. That was my in-laws' fault. They set me up to fail. He stormed off to his room, my old room, leaving me standing there, wondering how much longer I could live like this. 3 months into our forced cohabitation, I sat at my kitchen table, now covered in Tommy's dried baby food and Sarah's coffee rings, reviewing my bank statements. The numbers didn't lie, my expenses had nearly doubled since Michael and his family moved in. That was the final push I needed to call my parents. I rehearsed what I would say, determined to remain calm and rational. The phone conversation went about as well as expected. Mom, Dad, we need to talk about the living situation, I began. Michael and Sarah aren't contributing anything to the household expenses. They're eating all my food, using utilities I pay for, and... Emma, Mom cut me off, her voice sharp. I can't believe how selfish you're being. Your brother lost everything. His in-laws betrayed him. He has a baby to take care of. Dad's voice joined in from the background. You should be grateful you're in a position to help family. But that's just it, I pressed on. I'm not just helping, I'm carrying the entire financial burden. They don't buy groceries, they don't. Enough, Mom snapped. Your brother is going through a difficult time. This isn't forever. You need to be more understanding. That night, I opened my laptop and started searching for apartments. I bookmarked several promising options, all within walking distance of my office. Just in case, I told myself. Just in case things get worse. Things got worse exactly 2 weeks later. I was sitting on my couch bed, trying to focus on work documents while Tommy wailed in the background and Michael and Sarah had their fourth argument of the day. The doorbell rang, and my parents walked in without waiting for anyone to answer. Mom had that look on her face, the one she used to get right before announcing Michael had been enrolled in another expensive program. Dad stood behind her, avoiding eye contact. Emma, we need to discuss the rent, Mom announced. I looked up from my laptop. I paid this month's rent on time, as always. Yes, but starting next month, we're doubling it. The room fell silent, even Tommy stopped crying. I stared at my mother, certain I had misheard. Double? But I'm already paying the full market rate. Mom gestured around the apartment. Well, now there are more people living here. More wear and tear on the property. More utilities being used. It's only fair that the rent reflects that. Fair? I couldn't help but laugh. How is it fair that I should pay double rent for being forced to sleep on a couch in my own living room? If anyone should pay more, it should be Michael. He's the one who... I'm not paying anything, Michael jumped up from his chair. This is ridiculous. I lost everything, and now you want me to pay rent? Of course not, sweetie, Mom soothed, before turning back to me with a harder expression. Emma, you have a good job. You can afford this. Your brother needs time to get back on his feet. I looked at each of their faces, Mom's stern expectation, Dad's awkward avoidance, Michael's entitled indignation, Sarah's smug satisfaction. 3 months of built-up frustration threatened to explode, but I swallowed it down. Instead, I simply nodded. Fine, I said quietly. Double rent, starting next month. Mom's face broke into a satisfied smile. She and Dad left shortly after, clearly pleased with how smoothly their announcement had gone. They had no idea they'd just given me the push I needed to finally make my decision. Later that evening, while trying to read a book on my uncomfortable couch bed, I overheard Michael and Sarah talking in the kitchen. They were trying to whisper, but their excitement made them careless. Can you believe it? Sarah giggled. Your mom just told me they're going to give us half of Emma's rent money every month. Michael's smug reply made my blood boil. Of course they are. They understand we need help right now. Emma makes plenty of money, she can support us for a while. This is perfect, Sarah continued. We get to live here for free, and we'll even have spending money. Your sister doesn't need to know." I lay there, gripping my book so hard my knuckles turned white. All this time, I'd thought my parents were just being unfair, but this was a calculated scheme. They weren't just enabling Michael, they were actively planning to use me to fund his laziness. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the apartment listings I'd bookmarked. One caught my eye, a modern one-bedroom in a quiet building, actually closer to my office than the current apartment. The rent was exactly what I'd been paying before the proposed increase. I called the number immediately, trying to keep my voice down. "Hi, I'm interested in the apartment on Cedar Street." "Yes, I could come see it right now if that's possible." "Perfect, I'll be there in 15 minutes. The apartment was everything I hoped for: clean, quiet, and Michael-free. I signed the lease on the spot and paid the security deposit with my emergency savings. Back at the apartment, I waited until everyone was asleep before quietly packing my essential belongings into 2 large suitcases. I left my furniture; it wasn't worth the hassle, and I could buy new pieces that didn't have memories of this mess attached to them. The next morning, I wheeled my suitcases to the door while Michael sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through job listings he had no intention of applying to. "Going somewhere?" he asked, barely looking up. "Month-long business trip," I lied smoothly. "Big project in our Cincinnati office." He just grunted, already uninterested. I moved into my new apartment that evening, ordering takeout and sitting on the floor of my empty living room. The silence was beautiful. No crying baby, no arguing couple, no guilt-tripping parents. Just peace. For the next month, I lived quietly in my new home. I bought a comfortable bed, a cozy couch that wasn't a bed, and kitchen supplies that only I would use. I cooked meals that stayed in my refrigerator until I ate them. I slept through the night without being awakened by Tommy's crying. Then, right on schedule, my phone rang with my mother's number. "Emma," she snapped without preamble, "why haven't you sent the full rent payment? We agreed on double, remember?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Actually, Mom, I know all about your little arrangement with Michael and Sarah. Were you planning to tell me that half my rent money was going straight into their pockets? That's none of your business. Your brother needs—" "No, Mom," I interrupted, still chuckling. "What my brother needs is to grow up and take responsibility for once in his life. I've moved out, found my own place. The apartment is all yours and Michael's now." "You what?" she screeched. "You can't do this. We need that rent money." "Well, I'm sure Michael will step up and start paying rent now that he's had time to get back on his feet. I can't wait to see how that works out for you." There was a moment of silence on the phone after my declaration. I could almost hear the gears turning in my mother's head as reality finally sank in. Their reliable source of income was gone, and all they had left was their unemployed son who had never paid a bill in his life. "Emma, sweetie," Mom's voice suddenly turned sugary sweet, a tone I recognized from childhood when she wanted something. "Let's not be hasty. We can work something out. What if we go back to the original rent amount? That was fair, wasn't it?" I settled deeper into my new couch, the one I'd picked out myself, in my own apartment, where no one could kick me out of my bedroom. "No, Mom, that's not going to happen." "But Emma, we're family. You can't just—" "Family?" I interrupted. "Is that what you call it when you scheme behind my back to funnel my money to Michael? When you kick me out of my own bedroom while I'm paying all the bills? When you've spent my entire life treating me like an ATM while treating Michael like royalty? That's not fair. We've always—" "Goodbye, Mom." I hung up the phone and blocked their numbers. That was 6 months ago. My grandparents keep me updated on this situation, though I never ask. They just know I need to hear it, need to know I made the right choice. According to them, Michael, Sarah, and Tommy are still living in the apartment. They haven't paid a single month's rent. Mom and Dad are covering all the utilities, plus giving them spending money because the baby needs things. My brother still hasn't found a job. Apparently, there just aren't enough executive positions available for failed businessmen with a track record of bankruptcy. My new life is peaceful. I got another promotion at work, bought myself a car, and started taking evening classes for my MBA. My apartment is always clean, my food stays in my fridge until I want to eat it, and I sleep in my own bed every night. The other day, I ran into Sarah's cousin at the grocery store. She told me they're expecting another baby. I just smiled and wished them well, knowing that somewhere across town, my parents are probably already figuring out how to pay for another nursery. But that's not my problem anymore. For the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first. And it feels absolutely right. From my earliest memories, the contrast between how they treated me and my younger sister Katie was stark and painful. My name is Emily, and this is the story of how my own family betrayed me, and how I rose above it all. Katie was born just a year after me, and from the moment she arrived, it was clear she would be the golden child. Our parents, Mark and Sarah Harrison, showered her with attention while I lingered in the shadows. Every milestone, every achievement, every moment seemed to revolve around Katie. I remember my 10th birthday vividly. While Katie had received a lavish party with bouncy castles and professional entertainers just months before, my celebration consisted of a simple cake after dinner. "We're a bit tight on money this month," Emily, Mom had said, though somehow they managed to buy Katie a new iPad the following week. The disparity went beyond material things. When Katie spoke at dinner, our parents hung on her every word. When I tried to share my day, Dad would often cut me off with a distracted "that's nice, honey," while scrolling through his phone. The weight of their indifference was crushing. But the most frustrating part was the food situation. Katie had a severe peanut allergy, and instead of just managing her diet separately, my parents enforced a complete peanut ban in our house. I loved peanut butter sandwiches, they were my favorite lunch, but I wasn't allowed to have them, even at school. "It's not fair," I remember telling my grandmother Rose one afternoon while helping her bake cookies. "Why do I have to eat everything Katie eats? I don't have allergies." Grandma Rose was my sanctuary, the one person who saw me for who I was. Her warm kitchen became my refuge, a place where I could speak freely without fear of being dismissed or overlooked. "Your parents are making a mistake, sweetheart," she'd say, her wise eyes filled with understanding. "They think they're doing what's best, but they're not seeing how it affects you." I watched her measure flour into a bowl, the familiar motions comforting. Yesterday, Mom bought Katie new dance shoes because she said she might want to take lessons. But when I asked to join the science club, she said it was too expensive. Grandma Rose's face hardened. "I've tried talking to your mother about this, Emily. Just last week, I told her she needs to treat you both equally." "But Sarah," she sighed, shaking her head. "She claims Katie is more talented, more outgoing. Says you're too introverted, that it's harder to connect with you." Her words stung, but they weren't surprising. I'd overheard similar conversations before, my parents discussing how Katie was the special one, the daughter with all the potential. Meanwhile, I was just there. The quiet one, the less talented one. The one they had to accommodate but never really saw. While Katie's schedule was packed with dance classes, piano lessons, and art workshops, I spent my afternoons alone in my room, watching life pass by through my window. "Katie has such natural talent," Mom would gush at dinner. "Her dance instructor says she could go professional someday." Dad would beam with pride, while I pushed my food around my plate, invisible as always. But everything changed when I turned 12. Grandma Rose showed up one Saturday morning, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "Get your coat, Emily," she announced. "I've enrolled you in the Advanced Young Scientists program at the community center." That program changed my life. Suddenly, I was immersed in a world of experiments, equations, and endless possibilities. Our instructor, Dr. Chen, didn't see a quiet introvert, he saw a curious mind hungry for knowledge. When I correctly solved a complex algebra problem in my first week, he high-fived me in front of the whole class. By 14, I wasn't just excelling in science and math, I was standing at podiums, articulating arguments about climate change and social justice. People actually listened when I spoke. The shy girl who used to hide in her room was gone, replaced by someone confident, someone with opinions and the courage to express them. Emily's presentation on renewable energy was outstanding, my debate coach told my parents at a school meeting. She has a real future in scientific research if she wants it. I'll never forget Katie's face that day, the way her smile tightened, her eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to sharing the spotlight, and my growing popularity at school clearly bothered her. The changes were obvious to everyone. People started stopping by my locker between classes. I was elected to the student council. Suddenly, I had friends who valued my opinions, who invited me to study groups and weekend hangouts. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. That's when Katie started her whisper campaign. "Mom, Dad," I heard her one evening, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I saw Emily behind the gym today. She was kissing Tommy Martinez. And last week, it was Jake from her debate team." I burst into the kitchen. "That's a lie. I've never." "Katie wouldn't make this up," Mom cut me off. "She's worried about you, Emily. These boys, these late-night study sessions, it's not appropriate." "But I'm just..." "No more going out after 6, Dad announced. And we'll be monitoring your phone calls from now on. It's for your own good, Emily." "What about my debate team meetings? My science club?" "You can participate in school activities," Mom said. "But afterward, you come straight home. No exceptions." I looked at Katie, who was hiding a smirk behind her hand. She'd won again, and we both knew it. My newfound freedom was being stripped away, all because of her lies. As we grew up, Katie's antagonism toward me grew more pronounced. It wasn't enough for her to control my social life through our parents, she started targeting my belongings and the few friendships I'd managed to maintain despite the restrictions. One morning, I found my science project drenched in water, the careful calculations I'd spent weeks on bleeding into illegible smears. Another time, my favorite sweater, a birthday gift from Grandma Rose, mysteriously ended up with bleach stains. But the worst was what she did to my friendship with Rachel. We'd been close since middle school, bonding over our love of biology and bad reality TV shows. Rachel was one of the few friends who stuck by me despite Katie's previous rumors, but even she had her breaking point. "How could you?" Rachel confronted me one day at my locker, her eyes filled with tears. "Katie told me everything, how you write about Matt in your diary, how you're planning to steal him from me." "Rachel, that's insane. I don't even have a diary, and I've never." But Rachel was already walking away, leaving me standing alone in the hallway. That evening, I cornered Katie in her room. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. "Why do you have to destroy everything good in my life?" "You're paranoid, Emily," she replied coolly. "Maybe if you stopped obsessing over me and making up stories, you'd have more friends." I wanted to scream. Somehow, she always managed to twist things around, making me sound like the crazy one. And our parents? They never questioned her version of events. Then came Katie's 15th birthday. Mom spent days preparing for it, determined to make it perfect. The house was decorated with pink and gold balloons, and relatives filled every corner of our living room. The cake was Mom's masterpiece, 3 tiers of vanilla buttercream, Katie's favorite. Everyone gathered around to sing "Happy Birthday," and Katie blew out her candles to enthusiastic applause. But something was wrong. After a few bites, Katie's face changed. Her hand went to her throat, her eyes widening in panic. Mom recognized the signs immediately, an allergic reaction. "The EpiPen," Dad shouted, already running for Katie's emergency kit. Mom held Katie's hand while Dad administered the injection, and gradually, her breathing steadied. The party atmosphere evaporated instantly. Relatives huddled in concerned groups, while my parents tried to understand what had happened. "How did peanuts get in the cake?" Mom kept asking, checking and rechecking her recipe. I was so careful. That's when Katie spoke up, her voice still raspy. I saw Emily in the kitchen earlier. She was doing something with the cake. What? No, I protested. I wasn't even near the cake. But Katie pressed on. Check her purse, she whispered. The blue one, by the door. Dad grabbed my purse before I could react. And there it was, a small jar of peanut butter, one I'd never seen before, sitting right on top of my wallet. She could have died, Dad's voice boomed through the living room. What were you thinking, Emily? I stood there, trembling, as my parents hurled accusations at me. The jar of peanut butter in Dad's hand might as well have been a smoking gun. I didn't do it, I repeated, my voice getting smaller each time. Please, you have to believe me. Katie sat on the couch, an oxygen mask still near her face, but I caught the slight upturn of her lips. She was enjoying this, enjoying watching my world crumble around me. Our relatives shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. Aunt Jane pulled her daughter closer, as if I might try to poison her next. Uncle Bob wouldn't even meet my eyes. The only person who moved toward me instead of away was Grandma Rose. Now wait just a minute, Grandma's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone needs to calm down and think about this rationally. Did anyone see Emily put it there? This needs to be properly investigated. Everything is already clear, Dad interrupted. Emily, go to your room. We'll deal with this later. The next few days were a nightmare. At home, my parents acted like I was invisible. They'd leave the room when I entered, lock away all the food, and whisper behind closed doors. At school, word spread quickly. People moved away when I walked down the hallways, as if attempted murder was contagious. After 3 days of this torture, I couldn't take it anymore. I found Katie alone in her room, scrolling through her phone. You need to tell them the truth, I said, closing the door behind me. This has gone far enough. Katie looked up, and the smile she gave me was chilling. You know what's funny, she said, setting her phone down. I've been planning this for months. Waiting for the perfect moment. The birthday party was just perfect timing. Something snapped inside me. Years of pent-up frustration, anger, and hurt exploded. I lunged at her, grabbing her shoulders. We crashed to the floor, knocking over her bedside lamp. The noise brought our parents running. They found us wrestling on the ground, both screaming. She confessed, I shouted as Dad pulled me off Katie. She just told me she planned the whole thing. She planted the peanut butter in my purse. Stop lying, Katie shrieked, crocodile tears already flowing. See? She's crazy. She attacked me. That's enough. Mom's voice was ice cold. Pack your things, Emily. We can't have you in this house anymore. What? No, please. You're dangerous, Dad declared. We'll call your grandmother. Either she picks you up by morning, or we're calling social services. I fell to my knees, begging them to listen, to understand. But their faces were stone. Katie stood behind them, and through my tears, I could see her satisfied smile. Grandma arrived at dawn, her ancient station wagon idling in our driveway. As I loaded my hastily packed bags into her car, she confronted my parents one last time. What you're doing is despicable, she told them. You're choosing to believe a lie over your own daughter. Someday you'll realize what you've done, and it'll be too late. They didn't respond. They just stood in the doorway, Katie between them, watching as Grandma drove me away from the only home I'd ever known. Living with Grandma Rose was like finally being able to breathe after years of suffocation. Within a month, she had legally adopted me, handled all the paperwork for my transfer to Riverside High School, and converted her sewing room into my bedroom. At Riverside, nobody knew about the birthday party incident or Katie's lies. I was just the new girl with good grades and a quiet smile. Slowly, I started making friends again, real friends this time, who didn't have Katie whispering poison in their ears. I threw myself into my studies with renewed passion. Without Katie's drama and my parents' constant criticism, I flourished. My SAT scores were nearly perfect. I graduated as valedictorian, my speech focusing on resilience and the power of second chances. My parents didn't come to the graduation ceremony. I'd sent them an invitation, more out of formality than hope, but received no response. It hurt, but less than I expected. Grandma Rose's proud tears as I accepted my diploma meant more than their absence. I'd been accepted to several prestigious medical programs, but the tuition fees were daunting. Before I could even mention student loans, Grandma Rose pulled out a folder. "I've been saving for this since you were 12, she said, showing me her college fund for me. "I always knew you were meant for great things." Those 4 years of dental school were intense but rewarding. I lived in a tiny apartment near campus, worked part-time at a cafe, and studied until my eyes burned. Through it all, Grandma Rose was my rock, listening to my excited phone calls about successful procedures, and never once doubting my chosen path. I had no contact with my parents or Katie during this time. Sometimes I'd see updates about them on social media: Katie's job at a local retail store, Mom's garden club awards, Dad's bowling league victories. I'd scroll past them quickly, refusing to let their lives intersect with mine. Finally, after years of hard work, I held my dental license in my hands. My first job offer came from Brighton Dental Associates, one of the most respected private practices in the city. I posted a photo of my diploma and license on Facebook, adding a simple caption: "Dr. Emily Harrison, DDS. Dreams do come true." The response was overwhelming. Old school friends, distant relatives, even my third-grade teacher left congratulatory comments. Aunt Jane, who'd pulled her daughter away from me at that fateful birthday party, wrote, "We're all so proud of you, Emily." Uncle Bob posted, "Incredible achievement, kiddo." Looking at those messages, I realized something profound. I'd done more than just survive my family's betrayal, I'd transformed it into fuel for my success. My phone rang on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The number was familiar, though I hadn't seen it flash across my screen in years. "Mom." My hand shook as I debated whether to answer. "Hello?" I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Emily, sweetie." Mom's voice was syrupy sweet, the tone she used to use when asking Katie's teachers for deadline extensions. "We saw your announcement about becoming a dentist. We're so proud of you." I said nothing, waiting. "We've been thinking about you," she continued, filling my silence. "Your father and I, well, we'd love to have you over for dinner. Just to catch up. As a family." I shouldn't have agreed. Every instinct told me to decline. But curiosity, or maybe that stubborn little part of me that still craved their approval, won out. "What time?" I heard myself asking. The next evening, I pulled up to my childhood home in my new Mercedes. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling slightly around the windows. I dressed carefully: designer blouse, tailored pants, the pearl earrings Grandma Rose had given me for graduation. Armor, in its own way. Mom opened the door before I could knock. "Emily." She moved as if to hug me, then seemed to think better of it. Come in, you look so professional." Dad stood awkwardly in the living room. "Hey, kiddo." He'd aged more than I expected, his hair completely gray now, new lines around his eyes. "Is Katie joining us?" I asked, noting the table was set for 3. "Oh, no, she's busy tonight," Mom said quickly. "I made your favorite, pot roast." "Well, what used to be your favorite?" Dinner was a strange dance of forced smiles and careful questions. They asked about dental school, about my practice, about where I was living now. I answered politely but briefly, offering no openings for deeper conversation. "So," Dad said, pushing his potatoes around his plate, "dentistry must be lucrative?" And there it was. "I do all right," I replied neutrally. "She drives a Mercedes, Mark," Mom commented, as if I wasn't sitting right there. "And you mentioned an apartment, Emily?" "Yes, I bought a place downtown." "With a mortgage, of course." They exchanged glances. Mom set down her fork with a sigh that seemed rehearsed. Emily, we've been having some difficulties, she began. Your father, well, the company downsized last month. And my arthritis is making it harder to maintain my full schedule at the salon. That must be tough, I said, taking a sip of water. We were wondering. Dad cleared his throat. That is, maybe you could. Have you asked Katie for help? I interrupted. Mom's face fell. Katie's struggling too. Retail doesn't pay much, and she's barely making ends meet as it is. I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. Well, I'm sorry to hear about your situation, but I won't be able to help. I heard them calling after me as I walked to my car, but I didn't look back. The message from Mom came during my lunch break at the clinic. Emily, we need $20,000. Your father and I are about to lose the house. As our daughter, you have an obligation to help us. I stared at my phone, a strange calm settling over me. Finally, an opportunity. I'll give you the money, I typed back, on one condition: publicly admit on social media that I never put peanuts in Katie's birthday cake. Admit that you threw me out of the house because of Katie's lies. Tell everyone the truth. The typing bubble appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, after what seemed like hours, her response came through: we can't do that. It would destroy our family's reputation in the community. People would judge us. Surely you understand? I laughed without humor. Then you understand that I won't be giving you any money. Surely you understand? The response was immediate this time: after everything we've done for you. I turned off my phone and went back to work. 2 hours later, during my afternoon break, I saw Katie's name light up my screen. Something made me hit the record button before answering. Hello, Katie. You heartless bitch, she snarled, her voice dripping with venom. Mom's crying because of you. They're about to lose everything, and you're playing games? I'm not playing games, I replied calmly. I'm asking for the truth. I want them to admit what they did to me. What you did to me. Never going to happen, sis. You know why? Because it would hurt me. And they'll never do anything to hurt their precious Katie. Her voice took on a sing-song quality. They've always loved me more, you know. Even after I told them about the peanut butter. My heart stopped. What do you mean? Oh, didn't you know? She laughed again, the sound chilling. A few months after you left, I told them I planted that jar in your purse. They didn't even care. Dad just said it was probably for the best that you were gone anyway. That's how much they prefer me over you. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. You admitted it to them? Of course I did. I was so proud of my plan, I had to tell someone. And guess what? They didn't care. Each word was punctuated with malicious glee. They'll never admit it publicly because it would make me look bad. So you can forget about your little confession demand. The line went dead. I sat there, staring at my phone, the recording safely saved. After all these years, I finally had proof. My sister's voice, admitting to everything: the setup, the lies, our parents' willful blindness. With steady hands, I crafted the Facebook post that would change everything. No dramatics, no accusations, just the truth, finally set free. Many of you remember the incident at my sister's 15th birthday party, I wrote. The day my parents kicked me out of their house for allegedly trying to harm my sister with peanuts. For years, I've carried the weight of that false accusation. Today, I'm sharing my story not out of vengeance, but because the truth deserves to be heard. I detailed everything: the years of favoritism, Katie's escalating lies, my parents' blind devotion to her. I explained how they'd recently reached out, not to apologize, but to demand $20,000 from me. And now, I wrote, I have proof of what really happened that day. Listen to this recent conversation with my sister. I attached the audio file. Katie's voice, clear as day, bragging about planting the peanut butter in my purse. Admitting that our parents knew the truth but chose to protect her anyway. The cruel laugh as she described their indifference to ruining my life. Within minutes, the post exploded. Aunt Jane wrote a lengthy apology. Uncle Bob called me directly, his voice thick with tears as he expressed his regret for believing the lies. Even my old friend Rachel reached out, finally understanding why our friendship had really ended. Then came the angry messages from my family. "Take that down immediately," Mom demanded via text. "You're destroying this family," Dad bellowed in a voicemail. "I'll sue you for recording me without permission," Katie threatened. I responded to them all with the same message: all communications are being recorded and archived. My lawyer has copies of everything. Any threats or harassment will be dealt with legally. Please do not contact me again unless it's through proper legal channels. They must have finally realized I wasn't that powerless teenage girl anymore. The messages stopped. The calls ended. The social media harassment ceased. Grandma Rose came over the night after I made the post, carrying a bottle of champagne. "To the truth," she said, pouring us each a glass. "And to you, my brave girl. I couldn't have done any of this without you," I told her, fighting back tears. "You were the only one who believed in me when everyone else turned away." She took my hand, her eyes bright with pride. "I never doubted you for a second. And look at you now, successful, strong, finally free of their lies. Do you think they'll ever admit what they did? Try to make amends?" Grandma Rose shook her head. "Some people would rather live with their lies than face the truth about themselves. But that's their burden to bear, not yours." She was right, of course. She usually is. My parents and Katie chose their path long ago, just as I chose mine. They'll have to live with the consequences of their choices, just as I built a life from mine. These days, I focus on my practice, my friends, and my relationship with Grandma Rose, the one true parent I've ever known. The past doesn't haunt me anymore.